Chapter 12:10. In the valley, Nye Tian finally calmed down. His eyes were filled with joy as he exclaimed, Han Ling, you are indeed Han Fei's son. Your talent is far above Han Fei's. Sir, you. Han Ling was struck dumb, and didn't know what to say. If someone else had said that, he would have thought that they were mocking him, but Nye Tian wouldn't do that. Since he said that, there must be a reason. Han Ling was confused. Why did Nye Tian think he was more talented than his father? When Han Fei was his age, he was already a top swordsman in the divine realm, but Han Ling couldn't even reach the threshold of the Heavenly Sword Brilliance leaderboard. Brother Nye, you're saying that big brother Han Ling's sword intent contains the 5 elements and 5 attributes? At this moment, Xiao Yun finally understood something and asked with a doubtful expression. Yes. Nye Tian nodded. The sword intent condensed by the 5-element prison cutting origin spirit, of course it contains the 5 elements. Han Ling was stunned, his eyes filled with confusion. Mister, you must be mistaken. My sword intent only has the 3 elements of metal, fire, and wood. I know this better than anyone else. Can't be the 5 elements. Of course, Han Ling was well aware of his own sword intent. Even Mo Qianjun knew that he had a triple attribute sword intent. How was it possible that Nye Tian had suddenly said that he had mastered the 5 elements sword intent? Of course it's possible. Nye Tian smiled faintly, but his face was full of confidence as he said, My senses can't be wrong. Your sword intent is indeed of the 5 elements. Just now, Nye Tian carefully sensed Han Ling's sword intent. He truly felt the 2 elements of water and earth. Although it was weak, it really did exist. Luckily, Nye Tian had the holographic divine glyph. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to sense the other 2 elements. The first time he sensed Han Ling's sword intent, Nye Tian also thought there were only 3 elements. But the holographic divine glyph sensed the other 2 elements. One had to know that Nye Tian already had 95 levels of mental strength, but he still needed to rely on the holographic sacred glyphs to sense the 2 elements of water and earth, so it was reasonable that Mo Qianjun and Han Ling couldn't sense the existence of these 2 elements. At this moment, Nye Tian had completely understood. Han Ling's 5-elemental prison breaking technique was extremely frightening. It possessed 5 elements at the same time. Unfortunately, the distribution of the 5 elements was uneven. Metal, fire, and wood were too strong, while water and earth were too weak. Therefore, the 5-elemental sword will was in the same situation. Originally, a martial artist's origin spirit had the ability to harmonize their attributes, but the 5 elements prison breaker attribute was too different. Han Ling was unable to harmonize them. Han Ling's talent was very high, almost to the point of being monstrous. However, the attribute difference of the 5 elements prison breaker greatly suppressed his talent, making it very difficult for him to increase his strength. To be able to reach 2nd-level Heavenly Emperor strength under this kind of attribute difference, furthermore having the realm of sword soul, the hardships that Han Ling paid were far more than ordinary swordsmen. Nye Tian became cold and muttered to himself, Metal, fire, and wood, these 3 attributes, can't be fused. But if I let the 2 attributes of water and earth become stronger, the 5 elements complement and fuse together, it'll definitely be able to let Han Ling's sword intent attribute thoroughly fuse. The problem now is how to raise the 2 attributes of water and earth. Nye Tian's brows furrowed, seemingly forgetting the others, and he was muttering to himself. Raising a certain attribute of the sword intent, Nye Tian had never tried before and completely did not know how to go about it. Furthermore, the water and earth attribute in Han Ling's sword intent was too weak, virtually negligible. Hard, really hard. Nye Tian thought for a long time and also did not know what to do. In the end, he actually let out a long sigh. At this time, Nye Tian started to miss Elder Sword. If the latter was around, perhaps he would have some way. Master, you're unable to raise the attributes in the sword intent. You can try to balance his primordial spirit attribute. Suddenly, Corpse Demon Monarch's voice sounded out, carrying a hint of unique craftiness. Balance the primordial spirit attribute? Nye Tian was taken aback for a moment, then he immediately understood, and his eyes shone with a hint of passion. The Elder Sword was not around, but Corpse Demon Monarch was still around. This guy was also an old monster that had lived for hundreds of years, and he was indeed very useful. The huge difference in Han Ling's sword intent was caused by the 5 elemental hell-breaking primordial spirit. If he could balance the primordial spirit attribute, then it would be equivalent to solving the problem from the root. If the primordial spirit attribute changed, the sword intent's attribute would also slowly change. I can try to use the power of the stars to balance the primordial spirit attribute. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth involuntarily curled up. He took a step forward, looked at Han Ling with a passionate gaze, and said, Han Ling, I have an idea that might be able to help you merge the different attributes in the sword intent. Are you willing to give it a try? Han Ling's eyes froze, and he was stunned for a moment. It took him a long time to react, and he could not even speak a word, and could only nod his head repeatedly. The reason why it was difficult for him to increase his strength was because he could not merge the attributes of the sword intent. Even in his dreams, he wanted to merge the attributes of the sword intent. Now that Nye Tian had a way to help him merge the attributes of the sword intent, how could he not be willing? Alright, now release your giant spirit true body. Nye Tian nodded solemnly, unable to conceal the excitement in his heart. Han Ling did not have a hint of hesitation. His body shook slightly, and the essence force in his body surged out like a tsunami. 1,000-meter-long black broadsword appeared with a vast aura, and it was like a giant pillar that reached the sky, standing upright in midair. Such a powerful aura! Everyone's eyes couldn't help but tremble. They did not expect Han Ling's 5 elemental giant spirit true body to have such a terrifying aura. Above the 5 elemental hell-breaking body, there was a deadly black essence force circulating. It looked very terrifying, but it also gave off a majestic feeling, as though it was a god that suppressed all evil. Sit cross-legged and focus on the giant spirit true body. Pay attention to the changes in the aura, Nye Tian said in a deep voice and let out a turbid breath. He could not help but feel a little nervous. Han Ling sat down, closed his eyes, and focused all his divine sense on the 5 elemental hell-breaking body. Everyone stared blankly at the scene in front of them, not knowing what Nye Tian was going to do. Nye Tian nodded slightly. In the galaxy boundary within his body, the boundary zone origin formation quickly activated. Suddenly, endless power of the stars surged out and circulated around his body. The entire valley suddenly became dazzling, and under the flickering starlight, it was a dazzling scene. Such pure power! Everyone felt the aura of the stars, and their hearts couldn't help but tremble. This kind of power was too strange. It was different from any other power. It was like a source of power, very pure. The power of the stars was the source of power. Of course, it was extremely pure. It's starting. The corner of Nye Tian's lips curled up slightly. With a thought, the power of the stars instantly condensed into rays of starlight, and they slowly flowed into the 5 elemental hell-breaking body. The moment the power of the stars flowed in, Han Ling felt a tearing pain throughout his body, and he couldn't help but let out a groan. But in the next moment, he felt a soft and gentle force surging in the 5 elemental hell-breaking body, like the spring wind and rain, endless. As the power of the stars flowed in, the attributes of the 5 elemental hell-breaking body slowly changed. The power of the stars was a power that surpassed the power of the 5 elements. It was not strange that it could change the attributes of the 5 elements. Boom! At this time, Han Ling's body suddenly shook, and a surge of sword will shot up to the sky. The entire valley shook, and the 5 elemental hell-breaking body in midair actually expanded. Everyone was stunned, not knowing what was happening. Chapter 12:11. In the forbidden zone of heaven wasteland, a majestic sword intent soared into the sky, causing the entire valley to shake. In midair, the five elements hell-shattering giant spirit's true form began to swell. Its aura instantly shook the heavens and earth. This is... The others suddenly thought of something, and their faces suddenly changed, and they were shocked on the spot. Senior brother has broken through. Pu Fifan reacted and shouted out in surprise. He was even happier than if he had broken through himself. He had been by Han Ling's side since he was young, and the relationship between the two of them went without saying. The hardships that Han Ling put in during his daily bitter cultivation were far greater than that of an ordinary cultivator. However, he was unable to increase his strength. Only those who had experienced it personally would understand the torment. Now that Han Ling's strength had broken through, it could be considered a great blessing. The power of the stars is indeed terrifying. It can forcibly reverse the attributes of the five elements. Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly as he thought to himself. Just now, he had poured the power of the stars into the five elements prison-breaking array, trying to change the power of the three elements, metal, fire, and wood, into the two elements, water and earth. The effect of this attempt was very obvious. Coupled with Han Ling's own essence meridian's attribute reconciliation ability, the attributes in the five elements prison breaker were reduced considerably, directly helping Han Ling break through to the third-level Heavenly Emperor realm. At this moment, Nie Tian could clearly feel that the water and earth attributes in the five-elemental prison breaker had become much stronger. He didn't even need to use the holographic divine inscriptions to sense the water and earth attributes in Han Ling's sword will. This was a huge change that would bring about a qualitative leap in Han Ling's path of martial arts. Boom! At this moment, Han Ling's body trembled violently. Another surge of sword will gushed out, causing the space to tremble violently. A shadow of a sword shot up into the heavens, as though it was going to tear the world apart. Did you break through again? Lu Haoyu couldn't help but cry out when he saw this. Han Ling breaking through to the third-level Heavenly Emperor was still considered normal. After all, he had already maintained at the second-level Heavenly Emperor for a very long time. But if he broke through to the fourth-level Heavenly Emperor again, that would be too strange. I have indeed broken through. Xiao Yun's burning gaze trembled, yet he said, but it isn't a breakthrough in strength, it's a breakthrough in the Sword Dao. Sword Principal Realm. Lu Haoyu and the others were stunned, and their expressions became even more shocked. Xiao Yun was right. Han Ling's breakthrough this time was a breakthrough in his Sword Dao realm. He went from the Sword Soul realm to the Elementary Sword Profundity realm. Han Ling had been stuck in the Sword Soul realm for a long time, so it was not surprising that he could make a breakthrough. After achieving two major breakthroughs in a row, Han Ling was so excited that his body was trembling slightly. Han Ling, don't get distracted. Focus, Nie Tian reminded Han Ling to focus on the five elements prison-breaking technique. This time, Nie Tian wanted to completely balance the difference in attributes of the five elements prison breaker. The power of the stars greatly stimulated the five elements prison breaker, and the effect was very obvious. However, this was the first time, so the effect was outstanding. If it was the next time, there might not be such a big reaction. Thus, Nie Tian made up his mind to eliminate the difference in attributes within the five elements prison breaker. When Han Ling heard Nie Tian's voice, he calmed down. He knew that this was the most important moment for him, and he could not afford to be distracted. Phew! Nie Tian let out a long breath, and the realm zone formation in his body started to operate even more furiously. The vast power of the stars continuously flowed into the five elements prison breaker, causing the surrounding power of heaven and earth to change. What a terrifying power! Everyone else was dumbfounded. They could not believe that there was such a terrifying power hidden in Nie Tian's body. A gratified smile appeared at the corner of Nie Tian's mouth, as he sensed that the power difference between the 5 elements prison breaker was shrinking at an alarming rate. However, in the next moment, his gaze suddenly froze, and his expression became slightly stiff. Brother Nye, what's wrong? Xiao Yun was the first to notice that something was wrong with Nye Tian's expression and couldn't help but exclaim. Someone is coming. Nye Tian suddenly raised his head and looked outside the valley. He felt a sharp aura rushing towards the valley. The aura was so strong that it surpassed Yin Jiwei. Now is the best time for junior brother Han to balance his attribute. It can't be interrupted by others. I'll go stop him. Lu Haoyu growled, and his figure flashed as he jumped out of the valley. Nye Tian frowned, and he hurriedly said, Xiao Yun, hurry up and follow him. Xiao Yun's expression darkened. This was the first time he saw Nye Tian so panicked. He couldn't help but become nervous, and he quickly followed. Lu Haoyu was too reckless. Nye Tian could feel that the strength of the approaching person was stronger than Yin Jiwei. It was not someone that Yin Jiwei could contend with. Even with Xiao Yun, they were not a match for the approaching person. Forget it, I'll find another chance next time. Nye Tian was worried that something would happen to Lu Haoyu and Xiao Yun. He sighed in his heart and prepared to stop here. He would find another chance to balance Han Ling's attribute. Someone else is coming. But just as Nye Tian was about to stop the power of the stars, he suddenly felt another aura appear, and it also seemed to be very strong. These two people are not together. Sensing the other aura, the corner of Nye Tian's mouth involuntarily curled up, as if he didn't need to stop. This was the most crucial moment. He only needed a few minutes to balance the 5 elements of the 5 elements prison breaker. Shangguan Yufei, call the 2 of them back. Nye Tian thought for a moment and said to Shangguan Yufei. The latter nodded in agreement and directly walked out of the valley. Kong Shibua, Pu Fifan, the 2 of you retreat behind me. Nye Tian said again. He was already prepared and could act at any time. Outside the valley, Lu Haoyu and Xiao Yun each stood on a huge boulder, on high alert, waiting for the arrival of the enemies. 2 small shrimps, you want to stop me? At this moment, a gloomy voice rang out. After which, a silhouette soared through the air as his aura descended from the heavens, blotting out the earth and blotting out the skies. The surrounding space abruptly tightened as 2 majestic sword wills gushed out, blasting towards Lu Haoyu and Xiao Yun. The newcomer was extremely tyrannical. Without saying a word, he directly attacked. Watch out! Lu Haoyu and Xiao Yun felt an endless amount of murderous intent, and both of them shouted in fear. Immediately after, they attacked together, releasing 2 surges of sword chi. In front of the newcomer, they had no chance to fight back, and could only defend passively. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, 2 muffled sounds rang out, and the 2 of them were directly flung backwards. While they were still in the air, blood was already spurting out. Lu Haoyu and Xiao Yun crashed into the stone wall, and they were actually directly smashed into it. Blood slowly flowed out, dyeing the stone wall red. 1 sword, just 1 sword, and it had directly injured the 2 of them. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Xiao Yun. At this moment, a scream was heard. It was Shangguan Yufei. Bang! Bang! Immediately after, the stone wall shook, and 2 silhouettes walked out with great difficulty. Their bodies were covered in blood, and their flesh was so badly mangled that it was almost impossible to tell that they were human. Lu Haoyu and Xiao Yun had received a direct attack from the newcomer, and they were directly injured, but they didn't die. Chapter 12:12. Another assassin from the Heaven Desolate Hall? Outside the valley, Xiao Yun gloomily looked at the black-clothed man in front of him, his eyes flickering with a piercing cold light. The black-clothed man was dressed the same as the other assassins from the Heaven Desolate Hall, so he was obviously from the Heaven Desolate Hall. As the leader of the 9 great sword sects, the Heaven Desolate Hall held a sword principal competition on the surface, but secretly slaughtered other swordsmen. This kind of behavior was extremely shameless. Xiao Yun's guess was right. The person who had come was an assassin from the Heaven Desolate Hall, and he was the leader of the 13 Swords of Heaven Desolate, Huang Yi. The 13 Swords of Heaven Desolate entered the forbidden region of Heaven Desolate. The other 12 people were divided into groups of 4, while Huang Yi was alone. Kid, you know too much. It's easy to lose your life. Huang Yi smiled coldly, releasing a piercing killing intent towards Xiao Yun. At this moment, Xiao Yun was already seriously injured. Such a terrifying killing intent was enough to suffocate him and kill him on the spot. Xiao Yun. Shangguan Yufei sensed that something was wrong, and she cried out in alarm. Just as she was about to step forward, she felt a terrifying aura bearing down on her. Instantly, an invisible giant hand grabbed her by the neck, causing her to be unable to move, and her delicate face flushed red. Yufei! Xiao Yun shouted and cursed. Bastard, kill me if you have the guts. What kind of ability is it to attack a girl? Kill you? The corner of Huang Yi's mouth suddenly curled up. Then, his gaze darkened and he said coldly, Are you in such a hurry to die? Bastard! I'll kill you! At this moment, Lu Haoyu's blood-red eyes suddenly narrowed. His figure suddenly moved, stabbing out with his sword towards Huang Yi. Lu Haoyu was slightly stronger than Xiao Yun, and his defensive ability was also stronger than the latter. Therefore, the previous attack was not fatal to him, and he still had the ability to counterattack. However, Lu Haoyu's attack was destined to be a one-way trip. He was using his life to fight for a chance to escape for Xiao Yun and Shangguan Yufei. You're courting death. Huang Yi's mouth twitched when he saw that Lu Haoyu still dared to attack. He casually slapped out with his palm, and countless cold sword shadows appeared in the air, like icicles that filled the sky, shot towards Lu Haoyu. Big Brother Lu! Xiao Yun's gaze trembled as he instantly sensed that something was amiss, and he cried out in alarm. Desolate One's strength was too strong. He was already a peak 8th level Heavenly Emperor, a high-grade sword profundity realm. He was just a step away from stepping into the true peak. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that there weren't many people in the entire Heaven realm who could defeat him. Under this palm, Lu Haoyu was dead for sure. Lu Haoyu was in the air, but at the moment of his death, he turned around to look at the valley behind him. The corners of his mouth twitched as he murmured, Junior Martial Brother Han, Junior Martial Brother Pu, Senior Martial Brother's strength is limited. This is all I can do. That day, Nye Tian said that he, the eldest senior brother, was worthless. These words touched Lu Haoyu greatly. His entire mentality changed completely. As the eldest senior brother, he had indeed made too many mistakes in the past. But now, he wouldn't be wrong anymore. The moment Lu Haoyu drew his sword, he was already prepared to die. However, just as the ice spikes were about to land on his body, something strange happened. Such a hot-blooded swordsman dying like this, it's too much of a pity. Right at the instant between Lu Haoyu's life and death, a voice carrying a hint of ridicule sounded out. Following that, a streak of sword intent tore through the air, the speed swift to the extreme. It actually turned into a lightning shield in the air, enveloping Lu Haoyu. Bang bang bang. In the next instant, countless muffled sounds echoed out. Countless cold-blade sword shadows landed on the lightning shield, but were unable to breach the lightning shield's defense. Lu Haoyu's gaze trembled, then immediately became joyful. His figure moved, hurriedly retreating, landing firmly on the ground. Even though he was already prepared to die, if he could survive, it would naturally be even better. Amen. When Desolate One saw the scene that suddenly happened in the air, his expression suddenly fell, and he said in a cold voice, The Sword Sovereign's disciple didn't expect that you actually followed over. The icy cold voice faded. A figure in azure clothes descended like a ghost, directly landing beside Lu Haoyu. It was precisely the Western Domain's Sword Sovereign Jiu Qianxing's disciple, Ren Yihong. You've followed me for so long, if I don't return the favor, wouldn't it be too impolite? Rennie Hong's figure landed on the ground, the corner of his mouth curled up into a faint smile, unexpectedly revealing a face of ridicule. Xiao Yun looked at Rennie Hong, his expression involuntarily becoming sluggish. He didn't expect that the person who came would actually be so young, seemingly not much older than him, but his strength was extremely terrifying, unexpectedly able to resist the desolate Heaven Hall's assassin head-on. The Sword Sovereign's disciple. Xiao Yun suddenly thought of Desolate One's words, his heart trembled, and he said in astonishment, "Could it be that this person is the disciple of Jiu Qianxing? No wonder he's so terrifying." You are junior brother Rennie Hong?" At this moment, when Lu Haoyu looked at the person in front of him, he suddenly recognized him, and cried out in surprise. Rennie Hong had once stayed in the Wuji Mountain for a period of time, even though he was with Han Ling and the others, but Lu Haoyu still recognized him. Because Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing's relationship was relatively good, the disciples of the two of them called each other senior and junior brothers. Senior brother Lu. Rennie Hong was stunned, only then did he recognize that the person in front of him was actually Lu Haoyu. "It's really you." Lu Haoyu was extremely surprised, looking at the familiar face in front of him. His heart was shaken. Lu Haoyu still remembered that when Rennie Hong came to the Wuji Mountain, he was still a teenager, but in the blink of an eye, he had unexpectedly grown into such a terrifying swordsman. Back then, it was Jiu Qianxing who brought Rennie Hong to the Wuji Mountain, as if he specially came to Mo Qianjun to show off that he had taken in a good disciple. Now it seemed that Rennie Hong's talent in sword Dao was indeed terrifying. Lu Haoyu could almost be said to be the strongest person in the Wuji Mountain apart from Mo Qianjun, but in front of Rennie Hong, there was still too much of a gap. Perhaps when Pu Fifan grew up, he might be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Rennie Hong. Can the disciples of the Wuji Sword Saint and the Western Sword Sovereign also be considered brothers? Desolate One looked at Rennie Hong and Lu Haoyu cold, with a playful smile, and quite ridiculed. However, his expression was somewhat complicated, as if he was hesitating about something. Rennie Hong's sudden appearance was unexpected, and the former's strength had exceeded his expectations. The matter had become somewhat troublesome. "This is our matter, what has it got to do with you?" Rennie Hong smiled faintly and said mockingly, "You're a member of the Heaven Desolate Hall. Since you want to play, then let me play with you." As he said, Rennie Hong indicated for Lu Haoyu and the rest to withdraw. Rumble. Following that, Rennie Hong's figure trembled, sword intent gushing out wildly around his body. What circulated around his body were actually balls of wind and lightning vortexes. The swiftness of wind, the vastness of lightning, surged within, condensing into a sword of wind and lightning, enveloping his entire body. Wind and lightning dual attribute. Lu Haoyu retreated to one side, sensing the sword intent aura around Rennie Hong's body, and immediately cried out in astonishment. He did not expect that Rennie Hong actually also had dual attribute sword intent. Furthermore, it was the extremely rare wind and lightning dual attribute. No wonder that streak of sword intent earlier could reach first even though it was launched later. 7th level Heavenly Emperor's Strength, high-grade sword profound meaning realm. Desolate One looked at Rennie Hong, but the corners of his mouth curled up into a strange smile, and he said cold, "Want to play with me with such strength, can you afford to?" Chapter 12-13. Big Brother. Behind Desolate One, 4 figures landed and shouted in unison. The 4 were all dressed the same, each of their auras surging, their auras sharp, like killing gods descending from the sky. These 4 people were all 7th level Heavenly Emperor's Strength. Furthermore, they were all middle-rank sword profound realm. It seemed like each of them had the strength to fight with Rennie Hong. Amen. Rennie Hong's gaze tightened slightly. He did not expect that Desolate One's helpers came so quickly. Actually, when Desolate One was tracking Nye Tian's traces, he already informed the others to quickly rendezvous with him. Desolate One, this person was not only strong, but he was also very scheming, doing things flawlessly. Getting the others to come was to prevent unexpected situations from happening. Looking at it now, he was indeed not wrong. Junior apprentice Brother Ren. Lu Haoyu's face fell, immediately becoming nervous. If it was Desolate One alone, Ren Yihong might be able to resist, but 4 more came, their strength tyrannical to the extreme. Ren Yihong alone could not resist at all. It's fine, continue playing. Ren Yihong's expression was calm, not a hint of ripple could be seen on the surface. Instead, he laughed wildly, extremely arrogant. Jiu Qiansheng was a domineering figure to the extreme. His disciples naturally had the same personality. When Jiu Qiansheng took in disciples, the number one thing was not talent, but personality, whether you were arrogant or not. Someone like Duanmu Lu's personality would not enter Jiu Qiansheng's discerning eyes even in 10,000 years. This was a result of personality. It was not good or bad, just a difference in personal ideals. Arrogant. Desolate One smiled cold and directly growled, "Kill him!" At this time, no one could block his path. Regardless of whether it was Mo Qianjun and his disciple or Jiu Qiansheng's disciple, those who stood in his way would die. Yes. The other 4 people answered in unison, their auras shaking the heavens. 4 streaks of sword momentum surged up, like raging snakes, rushing straight for the horizon. The momentum of heaven and earth suddenly changed, even space was distorted by the 4-sword momentum. Boom, 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 boom. In the next moment, 4 sword shadows appeared, like 4 towering mountains, suddenly collapsing, crushing towards Ren Yihong. In an instant, heaven and earth changed color, wind and clouds surged, the ground directly torn, a series of shocking cracks appearing. Ren Yihong's figure was like a mountain as he stood on the spot, feeling the overwhelming sword momentum, but his expression still didn't change. A purple longsword appeared in his hand, surging with the power of wind and lightning. It was his Yuan spirit sword, Thundercloud beheading the moon. Thundercloud slashing moon was suddenly raised, and gusts of wind whistled out. The sword intent condensed into a huge vortex of wind and lightning in midair. The space was pulled taut, as if it was about to split open. Wind, thunder, roar. In the next moment, Ren Yihong roared, and a sword shadow soared into the sky like a dragon breaking out of the abyss. Boom! In midair, a terrifying roar resounded. The sword of wind and lightning had actually withstood the combined attack of the 4 sword shadows. Billowing waves of qi swooped down from the sky. The earth was forcefully torn apart. Gravel flew everywhere, sand and dust rose in all directions, and turbid waves rose to the sky. What a terrifying person! Lu Haoyu and the others retreated to the entrance of the valley and were stunned by the scene before them. With his power alone, Ren Yihong forcefully took the combined attack of 4 swordsmen of the same strength head-on, and he was actually able to not fall into a disadvantage. The terror of his strength made people astonished. 9 Qiansheng's disciple is indeed not bad. But it ends here. When Desolate One saw this scene, his gaze trembled a little. Following that, cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. Ren Yihong was restrained by Desolate Two and the others. This time was precisely the best opportunity for Desolate One to make a move. Thinking up to here, Desolate One did not hesitate in the slightest. An ice sword appeared in his hand. The long sword swept through the air, suddenly stabbing out. A bone-piercing chill howled out. An enormous icicle sword immediately appeared in the air. It was actually 1,000 meters in size, akin to a moving glacier, rolling over towards Ren Yihong. Crap! When Lu Haoyu saw the situation, his expression fell with a swoosh. Amen. Ren Yihong's gaze also could not help turning intent, his brows furrowing. Resisting 4 seventh firmament heavenly emperor swordsmen at the same time, this was already his limit. But Desolate One actually chose to do it at this time. It was simply shameless to the extreme. Stinking brat, even if you have heaven-defying ability, you're also going to die here today. Desolate One smiled coldly. Brutally killing 9 Qianxing's disciple with one sword made him feel abnormally excited. Is that so? But right at this time, a cold voice suddenly sounded out. Rumble! In the next instant, the void trembled with a loud bang. A several thousand meters in size crimson gold enormous dragon appeared. Crimson gold light reflected a stretch of sky red, the entire stretch of heaven and earth becoming narrow and small. Above the crimson gold enormous dragon's head, a silver-haired figure stood there, sword intent surging all over his body. Like a sword, he overlooked everything. Break for me, Nie Tian said solemnly. The crimson gold enormous dragon's body rolled. Massive dragon pressure shook heaven and earth, directly charging over towards the 4 sword images in the void. Bang! 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 4 muffled sounds transmitted out. The 4 streaks of sword intent were actually unable to withstand the enormous dragon's impact and directly shattered. Renihong sensed the pressure above his head vanish. His figure moved, vanishing like a ghost. But right at this time, that crimson gold enormous dragon's body turned around. An enormous dragon tail swept over. A loud bang transmitted out. The icicle enormous swords in the air were directly blasted into smithereens. Desolate One and the rest of the 5 people felt a tremendous aura pressing over. Their bodies actually could not stand, retreating one after another. This. Steadying his figure, Desolate One looked at the crimson gold enormous dragon high above, his eyes dazed for a moment, unable to speak for a moment. And when he sensed that that figure above the enormous dragon's head was actually only 5th level Heavenly Emperor strength, the shock in his heart reached the limit. It was hard to imagine that a 5th level Heavenly Emperor martial artist actually released such terrifying power. It was inconceivable. Nie Tian's figure stood on the dragon's head. Seeing that Lu Haoyu and the rest were all fine, he heaved a long sigh in relief inwardly. He had just finished balancing Han Ling's attributes and immediately appeared. Fortunately, it was not too late. Junior apprentice Brother Ren, it's you. At this time, Han Ling also walked out, recognizing Renihong at a glance, incredibly delighted. Big brother Han Ling. When Renihong saw Han Ling walk out, he was similarly pleasantly surprised too. When he was at the Limitless Mountain back then, he stayed together with Han Ling. The 2 people were as close as brothers. Meeting again, he was naturally happy. Big brother Han Ling, who is this person? Renihong calmed down for a while, his gaze looking toward Nie Tian with a look of surprise. The scene earlier was too shocking. The crimson gold enormous dragon directly repelled Desolate One 5 people. Such strength was universally shocking. What was even more terrifying was that Nie Tian actually only had 5th level Heavenly Emperor strength. Renihong regarded himself as a monstrous level genius, and even had the confidence to step into the peak of Sword Dao before the age of 100. But compared to the person in front of him now, it was a world of difference. Han Ling opened his mouth, but he paused, not knowing how to introduce. He could only say, a friend. Han Ling did not know if he should tell Renihong about Nie Tian's true identity or not. Big brother Han, this friend of yours is so impressive. Renihong smiled faintly. He was a smart person and knew that Han Ling had things that he did not say out, but he did not mind either. 9 Qianxing's disciple, you're pretty good too, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said in a loud voice. Chapter 12-14. It's you. At this moment, Desolation looked at the silver-haired figure in the sky and sensed the sword intent aura on the latter. It was actually the person he was looking for. His eyes narrowed and he exclaimed in surprise. Looks like you came specially for me. Nie Tian was slightly taken aback and immediately understood that the other party was actually coming for him. Ever since Nie Tian entered the forbidden region of Heaven Desolation, he had been constantly advancing. Even so, his whereabouts were still exposed. It seemed like Heaven Desolation Hall had other ways to track him. Indeed, a troublesome fellow. Desolation frowned and his eyes could not help but tremble slightly. No wonder Tsangshan Shui specially told him to definitely kill Nie Tian. The other party was indeed very terrifying. Nie Tian was only a 5th-level Heavenly Emperor at this moment, but he was already so terrifying. If his strength rose to the 9th level, probably no one in the entire Heaven realm would be his match. Such a person is too terrifying. I must kill him, Desolation thought to himself, his eyes revealing intense killing intent. Want to kill me very much? Nie Tian sensed the sharp killing intent from the other party, but the corners of his mouth curled up and he said that will depend on whether you have the ability or not. Since he had already used the Supreme Dragon's soul condensed from the 9-5 dual meridians, he was prepared to fight to the death. This time, it was definitely a battle of life and death. Kill! Desolate One didn't waste any more words. He coldly spat out a single word and then his figure moved. The sword of ice in his hand erupted with a piercing cold light in the air. Waves of tremendous coldness swept out, transforming into terrifying waves of air that directly froze the sky. Crack, crack, crack. The void was frozen, and the space instantly solidified. A bone-chilling chill spread out, making everyone feel a bone-piercing chill. Han Ling, all of you retreat! Nie Tian bellowed, and the scarlet gold dragon under his feet rolled out. Immediately, 2 bolts of lightning were released, turning into 2 lightning blades that directly blasted over. Desolation's goal was very obvious. He wanted to seal Nie Tian and the rest in ice. Unfortunately, how could the Supreme Dragon's soul condensed from the 9-5 dual meridians be so easily frozen? Boom! Boom! 2 bolts of lightning descended upon the frozen space like huge steel blades. With a loud bang, the frozen space immediately cracked open, and countless ice shards melted in the power of the lightning. Han Ling and the others quickly retreated. They could no longer be of any help. If they stayed, they would only become a burden to Nie Tian. As soon as Desolation saw the space explode, his expression darkened. Clearly, he did not expect the golden scarlet dragon to be so powerful. It was far beyond his expectations. Big brother, let us help you. At this moment, Huang and the others let out sharp cries as their figures charged into the sky. For surging strands of sword insight surged out like violent waves, and a terrifying imposing aura swept out as sword lights emanated a murderous aura that enveloped space and pressed down madly. Can you help? At the same time when the 4 figures flew up, Rennie Hong's figure also flew up. The thundercloud beheading the moon swept out and a terrifying sword shadow filled the sky. It pressed down majestically and blocked the joint attack of the 4 people. Very good. Seeing this scene, the corners of Nie Tian's mouth curled up slightly. His Supreme Dragon soul could not last for long. The dragon chi consumption was too great. He had to finish off Desolation as soon as possible. In the next instant, Nie Tian's gaze darkened, and he suddenly looked at Desolation, revealing killing intent. Since that's the case, then I won't hide my strength anymore. Desolation did not dodge in the slightest. His gaze was dark as he looked at Nie Tian. Suddenly, his body trembled, and an aura was immediately released. It was actually a surging sealing aura. When Nie Tian saw the situation, he was slightly taken aback. It seemed like Desolation undid some kind of seal on his body. Boom! Immediately, Desolation's entire body's aura suddenly skyrocketed. The sword momentum around him erupted. A terrifying frost intent suffused the entire stretch of space. An enormous ice sword akin to a massive iceberg appeared behind him. 9th level Heavenly Emperor. Titan True Body. Nie Tian's gaze turned intense slightly, his eyes revealing a trace of astonishment. Desolation seemed to have unlocked a seal on his body, prompting his strength to temporarily reach 9th level Heavenly Emperor. 9th level Heavenly Emperor's strength coupled with the power of the Titan True Body, Desolation staked everything this time. He must exterminate Nie Tian. Stinking brat, you forced me to do this. Can't blame me. Desolation smiled coldly. The enormous ice sword behind him swayed in the air. Immediately, a terrifying to the extreme icy aura surged out. The surrounding space could be sealed in ice. Sealing power. The frost intent surged out like raging wave. Nie Tion's brows involuntarily tightened. A dense and cold sealing power poured into his body. It was actually going to freeze his 9 dragon veins. Can you withstand this kind of sealing power? Desolation chuckled, his entire person virtually about to laugh wildly. As long as he could freeze Nie Tion's essence meridians, no matter how heaven-defying the latter's abilities were, he could only be reduced to fish on the chopping board too, at his mercy. Essence meridians sealed, martial artists were unable to use essence energy. How to resist the enemy? Once the ice seal in Desolation's body was released, it was sufficient to freeze a 9th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist's essence meridians. Nie Tion only had 5th-level Heavenly Emperor strength. It was impossible to resist this kind of sealing power. A measly little ice seal also wants to seal the Supreme Dragon Vein? Laughable. However, Nie Tion's reaction was indifferent, even somewhat disdainful. He said in a solemn voice, his body trembling. Immediately, an astonishing dragon roar echoed out. That frost intent in his body was directly forced out by him. How is this possible? Desolation felt a violent force rebound out and actually made his body tremble, being forced back several steps. He could not help crying out in shock, a look of astonishment on his face. Nie Tion was actually not afraid of his ice sealing power. How was this possible? Nie Tion stood tall in the sky, an icy smile appearing at the corners of his mouth. In the past, when he had yet to fuse with the hidden dragon royal bloodline, the 9-star dragon vein already did not fear any seal. Now that he fused with the hidden dragon royal bloodline and became the supreme dragon vein, how could he possibly be afraid of the ice seal? The supreme dragon vein would be suppressed under extremely rare circumstances. But wanting to seal it, it was simply impossible. Desolation completely did not know the terror of the supreme dragon vein. Thinking that relying on a measly little ice seal could seal the dragon vein, it was simply indulging in fantasy. Prepare to die. A cold light flashed in Nie Tion's eyes, his divine sense moving. A mental net whizzed out, enveloping over towards Desolation. It was precisely holographic imprisonment. Desolation was shocked by the terror of the supreme dragon vein. At this moment, it was precisely the best time for Nie Tion to make a move. Amen. Desolation's gaze trembled slightly, immediately feeling a terrifying to the extreme mental pressure appear, actually directly imprisoning his divine sense. In an instant, he could not sense anything. Die. Nie Tion seized the opportunity, and the scarlet gold dragon beneath his feet surged out. Like a warship moving rapidly through the void, it slammed towards Desolation. Desolation was momentarily dazed. He suddenly reacted, but it was already too late to make a move. Rumble. Crack. The scarlet gold dragon suddenly descended, its huge body colliding with the ice sword. A deafening explosion rang out, and the tearing sound was extremely ear-piercing, almost causing the eardrums of the surrounding people to rupture. The ice sword suddenly collapsed, turning into countless pieces of ice that dissipated within the dragon's might. Chapter 12:15. Amidst the scarlet gold dragon's ferocious charge, Desolate One's Titan true body directly shattered, turning into ice dregs and dissipating. Desolate One's figure flew backward in the air and landed heavily on the ground. Like a pile of mud, he collapsed on the ground and could not get up again. The Titan was really destroyed. Desolate One virtually suffered a fatal injury, his entire person a bloody mess, twitching non-stop, struggling to get up but unable to do so. He suddenly raised his head and looked at that figure in the air, his eyes filled with terror and doubt. He never thought that after he unsealed the ice seal and released the Titan true body, He would be defeated so miserably, completely without any strength to retaliate, and was actually instantly defeated by Nye Tian in one move. Why is it like this? Suddenly, Desolate One screamed, his entire face contorted, unable to accept all of this. He was a 9th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist. Why would he lose to a 5th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist? This was impossible. Nye Tianling smiled coldly. Apart from iciness in his eyes, it was full of contempt. Desolate One's greatest mistake was wanting to seal the Supreme Dragon vein. This was the crux of his failure. Of course, the appearance of the holographic confinement also caught Desolate off guard. It was already too late when he reacted the second time. To be able to die at the hands of the Supreme Dragon vein and holographic confinement, Desolate One should also die in peace. Nye Tian's figure moved, directly descending. A surge of killing sword intent surged down wildly, charging over towards Desolate One. He was not a kind person and would show mercy at this time. Only by killing Desolate One would he be able to set his mind at ease. Big brother! At this time, Desolate Two and the rest of the four saw that Desolate One was on the verge of life and death. They cried out in shock and became quite flustered, attacking at the same time. 4 vigorous sword images howled over, pressing over towards Nye Tian frenziedly. Can't even fend for yourself and still want to save others? Nye Tianling smiled coldly, the corners of his mouth twitching. The scarlet gold dragon tail swept out, dragon might vast and mighty, directly shattering those 4 sword images. No! Desolate One felt the aura of death approaching, and he immediately let out a hysterical howl. However, he no longer had a chance. The fear in his eyes intensified, and after a sword light flashed past, he finally stopped. All of his life force was severed just like that. Huang One, the leader of the desolate Heaven 13 Swords, died a miserable death just like that. Before he died, his eyes were filled with fear and unwillingness. The most troublesome guy has been killed. After killing Baron One, Nye Tian's expression relaxed slightly. If Baron One hadn't used the ice seal, it definitely wouldn't have been so easy for Nye Tian to kill him. But no matter what, Huang One had still died. The victor lived, the loser died. This world of martial Dao was just that cruel. Ah! Just at this moment, a scream rang out and a black-robed figure was sent flying. His body directly exploded in the air and turned into a bloody light that dissipated. It turned out that Ren Yihong had taken advantage of the time when the 4 of them were attacking Nye Tian to lock onto a black-clothed man and kill him with one strike. Big brother! Second brother! Seeing this, the other 3 raised their heads to the sky and roared furiously. Their eyes were filled with extreme rage, but at the same time, there was unconcealable fear. 4th brother, 5th brother. You guys go first, I'll stop them. At this moment, Baron 3 had already understood that it was impossible for them to kill Nye Tian and the others. They could only run for their lives. The friendship between the 13 swords of Heavenly Wasteland was very deep. In the face of life and death, they were actually willing to sacrifice themselves for others. This bravery was not bad. It's too late for you to run now, Nye Tianling said coldly, and cold killing intent rippled at the corners of his lips. He would not let the 13 swords go just because they were willing to sacrifice themselves for each other. No matter how respectable an enemy was, they were still an enemy, and they had to be killed. Let's fight. Baron 4 and Baron 5 did not plan to run. With a low roar, they attacked at the same time and attacked Nye Tian. Sword will surged and sword chi surged. The swordsman's final attack was filled with determination to give up everything. Too weak. Nye Tianling smirked coldly. The crimson golden dragon roared furiously, and dragon chi surged around its body. Its huge body charged forward and crushed the 2 sword wills that came at it. Ah! 2 screams rang out, and Baron 4 and 5 were sent flying. Their auras were broken, and their bodies could not withstand the pressure of the dragon chi. They exploded and blood splattered everywhere. They died on the spot. On the other side, Rennie Hong attacked and instantly ended Baron 3's life. The 5 strongest people of the 13 swords of Heavenly Wasteland had all died. These 5 people had killed countless people, and they had probably never thought that they would die in the hands of Nye Tian and Ren Yihong in the end. When they came here, they had wanted to kill Nye Tian and the others, but they were killed instead. Such a turn of events could not help but make people sigh. All 5 of them died. Nye Tian's aura dissipated, and the crimson golden dragon disappeared. He landed on the ground and his face was slightly pale. This was the first time he had used the dual meridians for such a long time. He had used up a lot of dragon chi in his body, and his origin power could not keep up. Nye Tian took out a few vitality consolidating pills and swallowed them. His pale face immediately became much better. Rennie Hong looked at Nye Tian by the side, shock on his face. If not for seeing it with his own eyes, he would not believe that there was actually such a terrifying figure in the world at all. Annihilating a 9th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist with 5th-level Heavenly Emperor strength was seriously too terrifying. Rennie Hong, is it? Nye Tian recovered slightly. His gaze looked at Rennie Hong, and he said with a faint smile, Jiu Qianxing indeed took in a fine disciple. If not for Rennie Hong this time, the outcome would not be so easy. At least, it was impossible for Nye Tian to adjust Han Ling's primordial spirit attribute. Furthermore, making Nye Tian face Baron E5 people at the same time, even if he had the sovereign dragon vein, it was also somewhat forceful. Amen. Rennie Hong looked at Nye Tian. Hearing the latter directly call his teacher by name, he was immediately rather displeased and said coldly, Your strength is very strong, but don't be too insolent either. Jiu Qianxing was the Heaven Realm's peak powerhouse. Anyone who mentioned him had to address him respectfully as His Excellency. Looking at Nye Tian's age, he was merely in his early 20s. He should be a junior of the sword world. Directly calling Jiu Qianxing by name so fearlessly was indeed too insolent. Nye Tian was slightly taken aback. He naturally understood what Rennie Hong was thinking, but he could not say it. He could only laugh dryly and say, Sorry, I was rash. Because he called Jiu Qianxing's name, he actually had to apologize. Nye Tian was slightly speechless in his heart. This time, he really gave Jiu Qianxing enough face. Junior apprentice brother Ren, Mr. Nye didn't do it on purpose. Please don't take it to heart. At this time, Han Ling walked over. He was the only person present who knew Nye Tian's identity. Seeing that Rennie Hong still had a dark expression, he hurriedly went forward and said, Mr. Nye. Rennie Hong was slightly taken aback, and his expression was rather puzzled. Han Ling's way of addressing Nye Tian was a bit strange, and his attitude was also very respectful. This couldn't help but make him suspicious of Nye Tian's identity. He then looked at Nye Tian and said, Your Excellency, how should I address you? Nye Tian. Nye Tian nodded in response. You. As soon as the words left his mouth, Rennie Hong heard these 2 words. His entire expression actually changed, and his expression instantly froze. Chapter 12:16. Rennie Hong's eyes flickered with excitement as he stared at Nye Tian. The shock in his heart was written on his face. The others were stunned. They did not know why Rennie Hong was so excited. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. It seemed that Rennie Hong already knew his identity. You are Nye Tian. Your strength is so strange. It seems that you are the lord that teacher mentioned. After a while, Rennie Hong calmed down. He could not hide the excitement in his eyes. There was respect in his eyes. At this moment, he suddenly understood why Nye Tian dared to call Jiu Qianxing by his name. It was because the 2 of them had the same status. It seems that you already know who I am. Nye Tian smiled faintly. He basically understood. Needless to say, Jiu Qianxing must have revealed his identity to Rennie Hong. And from Rennie Hong's tone, He came to the forbidden realm of infinite region to find Nye Tian. Yes. Rennie Hong nodded slightly. His attitude was much more respectful. He said, "Teacher asked me to find you and protect you." Nye Tian's guess was correct. Rennie Hong had indeed been ordered by Jiu Qian Sheng to come to Nye Tian, and his objective was actually to protect him. Jiu Qiansheng knew that Nye Tian was still alive. He also learned from Mo Qianjun that Nye Tian had come to the sacred realm of Heaven Realm. Not long ago, the ancient sword tomb opened in the Tianhuang mountain range. Jiu Qiansheng guessed that Nye Tian might appear in the Tianhuang mountain range, so he asked Rennie Hong to come to the Tianhuang mountain range. I see. Nye Tian smiled faintly. Although Rennie Hong did not say it clearly, he knew that Rennie Hong already knew his real identity. At this moment, Nye Tian's eyes flickered. He suddenly asked, "Since you are here, will Jiu Qiansheng and the others come too?" Jiu Qiansheng was completely different from Mo Qianjun. He was a hot-tempered guy. After knowing Nye Tian's whereabouts, he wanted to see Nye Tian directly. This. Rennie Hong hesitated and did not know whether to laugh or cry. I get it. Nye Tian saw Rennie Hong's expression and immediately understood. He smiled. Jiu Qiansheng must have told you not to expose his whereabouts. He wants to give me a surprise, right? Rennie Hong was speechless. His expression was clearly saying, "You know that too?" Nye Tian knew Jiu Qiansheng very well. As the peak expert, he had the heart of a mischievous child, and liked to play tricks on people. Rennie Hong's hesitation allowed Nye Tian to guess. Jiu Qiansheng. Old Ninth, it's been more than 100 years, but you're still the same. Nye Tian smiled inwardly as a cynical yet stubborn face appeared in his mind. Even though more than 100 years had passed, Jiu Qiansheng's personality hadn't changed at all, which made Nye Tian very happy. Jiwith. Nye Tian. Tian is. Nye Tian felt. King. Thinking of this, Nye Tian felt more at ease. Nye Tian had been worried that he would not be able to deal with experts like the Shura sect leader or Luo Chenhun. Since Jiu Qiansheng was here, things would be much simpler. Nye Tian even had a feeling that it wouldn't be long before Mo Qianjun arrived. At that time, the peak experts would be gathered. At the same time, in the Great Hall of Heaven Wasteland. Impossible, this is impossible! An angry roar suddenly sounded and echoed in the spacious hall, revealing a great deal of panic. Song Shanshue's body trembled. He stared at the sensing spiritual array. His expression was complicated. There was shock, anger, surprise, and even a trace of fear. The 13 swords of Heaven Wasteland. In the blink of an eye, 9 people had died. Even the 5 strongest people had died. Song Shanshue could not accept this. The Heaven Wasteland Hall had spent a lot of resources to cultivate the 13 swords of Heaven Wasteland. Now, 9 people had died. Such a painful result almost drove Song Shanshue crazy. Beside him, Duguanai looked on coldly. His eyes flickered. No one knew what he was thinking. Junior, tell me, who exactly is this person? A moment later, Song Shanshue suddenly looked at Duguanai and growled. He could tell that Duguanai knew Nye Tian's identity, but was unwilling to reveal it. Song Shanshue did not ask before because it was not painful enough. Now that the 5 strongest people of the 13 swords of Heaven Wasteland had died, Song Shanshue could not care less and directly asked Duguanai. Duguani's eyes narrowed. He did not like Song Shanshue's attitude. But he still let out a strange laugh and said, "Senior brother, this person's identity is related to many things. Are you sure you want to know?" Song Shanshue was taken aback. He looked at Duguanai with hesitation. He knew that Duguanai had connections with some powerful people. Some things were very important. Once known, it was equivalent to stepping into a swamp. It would be impossible to get out. Although Duguanai was a swordsman of the Heaven Wasteland Hall on the surface, his real identity was very complicated. Not to mention Song Shanshue, Even the true controller of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, Elder Tian Huang, was somewhat afraid of Duguanai. One must know that Elder Tian Huang was Dugunai's teacher. The teacher was afraid of his disciple. This was enough to show how terrifying Duguanai was. Senior brother, it is not wrong that the 13 swords of Heaven Wasteland were defeated by this person. Because of this person's identity, Duguanai said with a strange smile on his face. He paid attention to Tsang Shanshue's reaction. Tsang Shanshue frowned. Suddenly, he made up his mind and said in a cold voice, "Tell me, who is this person?" Dugunai's eyes narrowed slightly. His face was filled with joy. His lips moved and he spat out 2 words, "Nye Tian." "Nye Tian?" Tsang Shanshue was stunned when he heard this name. Then, he suddenly thought of something. His gloomy face suddenly changed. His entire person revealed great fear. Even his voice was trembling. He looked at Dugunai nervously and said, "You said he is the Danite domain's Nye Tian?" "Of course." Dugunai smiled faintly. He was incomparably proud in his heart. He thought to himself, "Senior brother, you have been cautious your whole life. I didn't expect you to fail at this time. Now that you know the name Nye Tian, you can't get out of this mess." Tsang Shanshue suddenly realized something. His eyes shrunk. His eyes revealed regret and fear. He suddenly understood why Nye Tian could kill Desolate and the others. It was because he was once the Heaven Realm's #1 war god, the peak of Sword Tao. "Senior brother, I have reminded you. Some things, once known, the consequences are very serious." Dugunai smiled faintly and said, "Maybe in the future, Luo Chenhun will ask you for help. I hope you won't refuse." Dugunai Tsang Shanshue's body suddenly trembled. He suddenly understood everything. Only now did he realize that he had been tricked by Dugunai. Dugunai already knew Nye Tian's identity. That was why he lured Tsang Shanshue to send Desolate and the others to kill Nye Tian. The death of Desolate and the others made Tsang Shanshue lose his mind. He forced Nye Tian's true identity. Dugunai then took advantage of the situation and told him Nye Tian's identity. Chapter 12:17. It was not a simple matter for Dugunai to let Tsang Shanshue know Nye Tian's true identity. All along, everything that Dugunai did had nothing to do with the Heaven Wasteland Hall. Tsang Shanshue had never asked about it, and even if he heard something, he would not care. The reason for this was to keep the Heaven Wasteland Hall out of the matter. But now that Tsang Shanshue knew Nye Tian's identity, things had become complicated. Dugunai would definitely tell Luo Chenhun about this matter, and even let the person behind it know. At that time, Luo Chenhun would personally look for Tsang Shanshue, and the latter would not be able to hide even if he wanted to. Tsang Shanshue did not expect Dugunai to be so vicious, to actually plot against his senior brother. What was even more fatal was that Tsang Shanshue's identity was extraordinary. He was the hall master of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, and if he got involved, it would be equivalent to dragging the entire Heaven Wasteland Hall down with him. Even Elder Tian Wasteland would not be able to stay out of the matter. Dugunai's heart was extremely vicious. He was someone who came from the Heaven Wasteland Hall, yet he actually schemed against the Heaven Wasteland Hall. He was indeed vicious. "Senior brother, don't be so nervous." At this time, Dugunai suddenly laughed and said, "Now that Nye Tian is the Shuragate's trouble, we can all pray that the Shuragate Master can get rid of Nye Tian. This way, the Heaven Wasteland Hall will not have to do anything." Tsang Shanshue was once again speechless. Dugunai's words were very clear. The Heaven Wasteland Hall had to stand on the same side as him. If the Shuragate could not get rid of Nye Tian, then it would be the Heaven Wasteland Hall's turn. What was more troublesome was that even if Nye Tian really died, would there be new troubles in the future? If Luo Chenhun asked the Heaven Wasteland Hall to do something, would they do it? Songshan Shui had heard that Nie Tian's matter back then was definitely not as simple as his outstanding achievements intimidating the Shura Gate Master. There was a shocking secret behind it. One had to know that there were some things that only the 9 emperors knew about in the heaven realm. Songshan Shui suppressed his anger. His body was trembling. On the other hand, Duguanai was calm and even looked at Songshan Shui with a mocking gaze. "I'll go look for teacher." Though Songshan Shui was enraged, he did not dare to do anything to Duguanai. Ignoring the fact that he could not win against Duguanai, Duguani's complicated identity was enough to make him fearful. Songshan Shui was no longer in the mood to pay attention to the competition of the Sword Way. He left angrily to find Elder Tian Huang. The Sword Dao competition was just to suppress the other sword sects and ensure the position of the Heaven Wasteland Palace as the leader of the 9 great sword sects. However, the matter regarding Nie Tian concerned the survival of the Heaven Desolate Hall. If they were not careful, the Heaven Desolate Hall might fall into eternal damnation. Back then, Nie Tian was killed by Luo Chunhun, and even his corpse was destroyed. Even so, he was still able to be reborn. Who knew what secrets he was hiding? The reason why Nie Tian returned to the Heaven Realm was definitely for revenge. The enmity between him and Luo Chunhun was irreconcilable. Since Songshan Shui already knew about this, he had to choose a side. If he chose the wrong side, it would be a disaster. Shixiang, teacher has not been involved in worldly affairs for a long time. Why bother him? Duguanai looked at Songshan Shui's departing figure and shouted loudly, his voice extremely mocking. He was overjoyed at this moment and murmured, "My good senior brother, you are so anxious to drag teacher down. Teacher really did not pass the position of hall master to you in vain." A cold laughter resounded in the Heaven Desolate Hall, like the roar of a ferocious ghost. Most of the 13 swords of Heaven Desolate are dead. The sword principal battle is about to end. Duguanai glanced at the spiritual array, laughed and turned to leave. At this moment, he had also lost interest in the sword principal battle. There was some good news that he had to tell Luo Chunhun. Duguani's figure moved and turned into a sword light, disappearing into the void. In a valley in the forbidden region of Heaven Desolate Domain, Nie Tian was sitting cross-legged, recovering his strength. After a while, he suddenly stood up and opened his eyes, giving off a sharp aura. Rennie Hong's eyes flickered as he looked at Nie Tian and secretly said, "It's only been half a day, but he was able to completely recover from the depletion of his yuan qi. Amazing." Of course, he did not know that Nie Tian possessed the chaotic original coffin. Half a day was equivalent to 5 to 6 days for Nie Tian. Seeing that Nie Tian had recovered his strength and seemed to have become more powerful, the others were shocked. Due to the sky-devouring soul of the star power, Nie Tian could more or less devour some energy after each battle and use it for himself. Therefore, after every battle, his strength would increase a little. "Han Ling, how do you feel now?" Nie Tian smiled and looked at Han Ling with concern. Previously, Han Ling had already greatly reconciled the difference in the attributes of his Yuan spirit with Nie Tian's help, and the 5 elements in the 5 elements prison-breaking technique were basically balanced. Even if there was still a slight difference, Han Ling's attribute strength was enough to eliminate the difference. "I feel much better now. There are now 5 elements in the sword essence." Han Ling nodded heavily, looking extremely excited. As he spoke, he released a gust of sword essence, which condensed into a sword shadow and shrouded his body. Within the sword shadow, the power of 5 different attributes flowed and transformed into 5 different colors, looking extremely mysterious. "It's really the 5 elements attribute." When the others sensed the aura of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, the 5 elements, they cried out one after another. The 2 attributes of water and earth are already very obvious. Very good. Nie Tian smiled faintly, very satisfied with Han Ling's change. 5 elemental sword essence. As long as Han Ling could thoroughly fuse the 5 attributes, the accomplishments that he could attain in the future would definitely be above Han Fei's, and he might even step into the pinnacle of Sword Dao. Han Ling's strength improvement previously was slow, but he cultivated non-stop. Hence, his realm was more stable than ordinary martial artists. With his current 3rd-level Heavenly Emperor, initial rank Sword Profound Meaning Realm, it was sufficient to contend with 4th-level Heavenly Emperor, even 5th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artists. But his opponent, Qin Yang, had 6th-level Heavenly Emperor strength. Wanting to defeat the other party with his current strength was still impossible. I hope that after entering the Sword Tomb, I can encounter a suitable Sword Dao inheritance. Best if it's a 5 elements attribute inheritance. Letting Han Ling fuse with it, his strength will definitely have a qualitative increase. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said in his heart, "Mister, what do we do now?" Han Ling dispersed the sword intent all over his body and suddenly asked. They did not have spirit talismans in their hands. If they were unable to enter the ancient sword tomb because of not having spirit talismans, that would be terrible. Randomly snatch a few spirit talismans. Nie Tian knew Han Ling's worries and smiled faintly, preparing to leave the valley. The 13 heavenly desolate swords were basically all dead. There were still a few small fries left. Nie Tian naturally did not care. Right now, they only needed to snatch a few spirit talismans, then wait for the Sword Dao struggle to end. With Nie Tian, Ren Yihang, and the rest around, the Sword Dao struggle already did not have any swordsman that could pose a threat to them. Save me! Just as Nie Tian and the rest were preparing to leave the valley, a sharp cry sounded out, appearing extremely panicked. Chapter 12:18. Qin Yang. In the valley, when Han Ling heard the panicked cry for help, he was stunned for a moment before he exclaimed in shock. "It's really him!" Nie Tian squinted his eyes and immediately recognized the voice. It was indeed Qin Yang's voice. No wonder it sounded so familiar. "Don't kill me, don't kill me." Then, the sound of begging was heard. Qin Yang seemed to be forced into a desperate situation by someone. Han Ling furrowed his brows. His figure flashed as he dashed forward. The others quickly followed him. A few thousand meters away, a figure was running for his life. He was covered in blood and there was a hole in his chest that was bleeding profusely. This person was none other than Qin Yang. At this moment, he was severely injured. The young master of the sword observation C is just a good-for-nothing who only knows how to run. A mocking voice was heard from behind him. In the next moment, a sharp shadow of a sword pierced through the air, emitting a cold whistling sound in the air as it attacked Qin Yang. The person who attacked was very strong and his sword will was terrifying. It was obvious that he wanted to kill Qin Yang in one hit. If this sword landed on Qin Yang, he would die for sure. At the moment when Qin Yang was on the brink of death, a sword will descended from the sky and blocked the fatal attack for him. Then, a figure landed and the starlight wings behind him disappeared. "I am the young master of the sword observation C, Qin Yang. Thank you for saving my life." Qin Yang was so emotional that his eyes were brimming with tears. But when he raised his head and saw the face of the person in front of him, he froze. The expression on his face was uglier than eating **T. He never thought that the person who saved his life was actually Nie Tian. The young master of the sword observation C? Nie Tian glanced at Qin Yang and sneered in disdain. In the next moment a few figures appeared. One of them was slightly nervous. It was Han Ling. Seeing that Qin Yang was fine, Han Ling relaxed. No matter what Qin Yang did, he was Qin Yu's brother after all. Han Ling had some feelings for him and didn't want him to die. Han Ling. When Qin Yang saw Han Ling, he was stunned again. His face was even more embarrassed and he wanted to find a hole to hide in. He didn't want to die, but being saved by Han Ling and the others made him feel very uncomfortable. Another assassin from the Heaven Wasteland Hall? Nie Tian did not bother about Qin Yang for the time being. He looked at the person chasing after him with a cold, killing intent flashing in his eyes. There were 4 black-clothed people in front of Nie Tian. They were dressed the same as Huang Yi's group. Without a doubt, they were assassins from the Heaven Desolate Hall. Nie Tian remembered that there were a total of 13 assassins in the forbidden domain of Infinite Wasteland. 9 of them had already died, and the 4 people in front of him were the remaining 4. These 4 people were probably looking for Nie Tian. Unfortunately, they encountered Qin Yang on the way, so they decided to kill him. These 4 people's strengths were all 6th level Heavenly Emperor strength, at the middle rank Sword Profound Realm. If Qin Yang were to encounter one of them, he could completely put up a fight. But with the 4 of them joining hands, he did not have the slightest strength to retaliate. "It's you." The 4 Heaven Desolate Hall assassins faintly felt that Nie Tian's aura was somewhat familiar and immediately reacted. This person was the person who killed Huang Shi-san. Their gazes immediately turned cold, revealing killing intent. "Your Excellency, leave these few shrimps to me." At this time, a person appeared behind Nie Tian and spoke indifferently. It was precisely Ren Yihong. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He was currently unable to use Sword Absolute Heaven Slash. If he were to fight with the few people in front of him, it would indeed be somewhat troublesome. It was very likely that he would have to use the Supreme Dragon Vein again. Hence, it was better to let Ren Yihong deal with them. 7th level Heavenly Emperor strength. Huang Shi-san's group of 4 detected Ren Yihong's strength, their gazes involuntarily trembling, incredibly shocked. "Prepare to die." Ren Yihong smiled cold. Thundercloud slashing moon attacked, directly blasting over. Nie Tian did not pay attention to the battle either. With Ren Yihong's strength, torturing and killing the 4 people was not an issue. Nie Tian frowned a little, then walked over towards Qin Yang. What do you want to do?" When Qin Yang saw Nie Tian walk over with a cold smile on his face, he immediately turned pale with fright, his entire body drenched in cold sweat. Han Ling thought that Nie Tian wanted to kill Qin Yang and actually went forward to say, "Sir, he's Qin Yu's elder brother after all. Better spare his life." Qin Yang was stunned, clearly not expecting that Han Ling would plead for him. One had to know that he and Han Ling had a life-and-death battle. And at this time, Qin Yang suddenly discovered that Han Ling's aura actually became much stronger. He sensed carefully and was startled to discover Han Ling's strengths change. He was immediately stunned until he could not speak. Han Ling's strength had always been improving very slowly. In just a short half a month's time, he actually broke through miraculously. This caught Qin Yang by surprise. "Relax, I won't kill him. I just want some things from him." Nie Tian smiled faintly. He did not want to kill Qin Yang. He just wanted some things. "What do you want?" Qin Yang gulped down a mouthful of saliva and said nervously, "Young Master Qin, it seems that you have gained a lot from the Sword Principal battle. Hand them all over." Nie Tian smiled sinisterly, his eyes flickering with a strange light. Everyone else was taken aback and looked at Nie Tian in confusion. Qin Yang's face was extremely ugly. He finally understood. He stretched out his trembling palm and took out more than 10 spiritual talismans. Spiritual talismans! Han Ling and the rest were stunned when they saw the spiritual talismans. Who would have thought that Qin Yang actually had more than 10 spiritual talismans in his hands? It was obvious that these were snatched by Qin Yang from other swordsmen. Snatching more than 10 spiritual talismans, Qin Yang was really ruthless. With so many spiritual talismans on him, it would be strange if he did not attract the assassins of the Heaven Wasteland Hall. "Young Master Qin, you're not honest. I mean, hand them all over." Nie Tian glanced at the spiritual talismans and smiled sinisterly. His eyes darkened as he said, "Trying to hide things in front of me will cost you your life." Gulp. Qin Yang gulped again. Only now did he realize that Nie Tian was far more cunning than he had imagined. This time, Qin Yang didn't dare to hide anymore. He directly took out all the spiritual talismans on him, held them with both hands and said with a depressed face, "These are all the spiritual talismans. They are all here." The others looked at the spiritual talismans in Qin Yang's hands and immediately gasped. This guy actually had more than 100 spiritual talismans. More than 100 spiritual talismans. Qin Yang was really ruthless. Is this guy an idiot? One spirit talisman is enough. Is he trying to collect it? At this time, Ren Yihong finished off the 4 assassins. He came over and said with a smile. Nie Tian was also stunned. He didn't expect Qin Yang to be more greedy than he had expected. Qin Yang felt the strange gazes around him and quickly said, "I only wanted their spiritual talismans. I didn't kill them." "Really?" Nie Tianling sneered and his eyes revealed coldness. He said sinisterly, "I believe that you didn't kill them, but I don't believe that you only wanted their spiritual talismans." Qin Yang's eyes trembled violently. Nie Tian was far more shrewd than he had expected. "Hand them all over." Nie Tianling sneered and his body shivered. This time, Qin Yang didn't dare to play tricks. He quickly took out a space bag and poured it out. Hundreds of space rings appeared. Seeing this scene, everyone was stunned. They suddenly realized that Qin Yang didn't kill them, but he was robbed by those swordsmen one by one. What an unexpected fortune! Nie Tian was also stunned for a moment, then he laughed and his eyes kept flickering. Chapter 12:19. Looking at the hundreds of space rings in front of him, Nie Tian's eyes flickered and he couldn't help but feel excited. Since he couldn't use the Heaven/Sword, Nie Tian urgently needed a spiritual sword, preferably a rank 9 Emperor weapon. The others were also stunned when they saw the space rings all over the ground. It had to be said that Qin Yang was really greedy. He actually robbed so many people. This guy was really strange. The dignified young master of the Sea of Swords actually robbed during the sword doctrine competition. If this was spread out, the reputation of the Sea of Swords would definitely plummet. The 9 major sword sects changed their profession and became robbers. This gimmick was definitely enough. "Qin Yang, you can go." Nie Tian smiled faintly and waved his hand slightly, indicating that Qin Yang could leave. Qin Yang was stunned and said, "My own talisman is still in there, get lost." Nie Tian roared and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Qin Yang was so scared that his face turned pale. He didn't dare to stay any longer and ran away. This time, Qin Yang really lost all his hard-earned money. Not only did he lose the things he robbed, he even lost his spiritual talisman. However, it was still worth it to exchange these things for his life. "Mister, there are so many space rings, should we return them?" Han Ling was stunned and looked at the rings on the ground. He was actually in a dilemma. "Return them? You are crazy." Nie Tian rolled his eyes and said directly, "Of course we should split them." Han Ling was really too honest. He was actually thinking about how to return the space rings. The others smiled and of course expressed their agreement. "Haha, so many space rings, I have never seen so many." Pu Fifan laughed very happily. "Take as many as you want." Nie Tian smiled faintly. He used his divine sense to explore the space rings and began to search for what he wanted. Han Ling and Ren Yihong looked at each other speechlessly. Both of them knew Nie Tian's identity. It was hard to believe that the number 1 war god in the heaven realm would actually take advantage of the situation. However, Nie Tian didn't care too much about it. He did this kind of thing often. His divine sense swept through the interspatial rings one by one. At a certain moment, Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly, flashing with a blazing divine light. He picked up a spatial ring, and with a thought, a jet-black longsword appeared in his hand. It was sharp and radiated with a black radiant. Reverse dark element blade. Nie Tian saw that there were 4 words carved on the sword, and below it was a line of smaller words, another defective product. This is a grade 8 spirit weapon. When the others felt the aura of the reverse serene essence blade, they all cried out in shock. They didn't expect Nie Tian to actually be able to find a Tier 8 spirit weapon. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "The reverse serene essence blade is one of the 10 great blades of the Heaven Realm, ranked 3rd among the 10 great blades. The Heaven Realm had the 10 great blades. Nie Tian's sword Absolute Heaven Slash was the first of the 10 great blades, while the reverse serene essence blade was the 3rd. Impossible, right?" Renihong was stunned for a moment and said, "This is clearly a grade 8 spirit weapon. How can it be ranked in the 10 great blades? So this is a defective product of the reverse serene essence blade." Nie Tian laughed and pointed to the line of small words below. The reverse serene essence blade was forged by the Heaven Realm's #1 artificer, Tian Gong. The one in Nie Tian's hand should be a defective product made by Tian Gong during the forging process. This old man Tian Gong was really interesting. He actually marked this as a defective product of the reverse serene essence blade. A defective product was still a grade 8 spirit weapon. One could imagine how terrifying a genuine one was. Although it's a defective product, it's enough. Nie Tian kept the reverse serene essence blade. He was quite satisfied. His sword Absolute Heaven Slash was only a grade 7 spirit weapon. The defective reverse serene essence blade was able to reach grade 8 spirit weapon. It was definitely better than the sword Absolute Heaven Slash. With Nie Tian's current strength, he could already perfectly control the power of a grade 9 Emperor weapon, but unfortunately, he did not have a grade 9 Emperor weapon. Next, everyone divided up all the rings, each with a joyful look on their faces. "Mister, what do we do with these spirit talismans?" Han Ling looked at Nie Tian and asked. "Everyone take one, crush the rest," Nie Tian said as he casually took a spirit talisman. These spirit talismans had no other use other than to help swordsmen enter the forbidden domain of Heaven Wasteland, so there was no point in keeping them. Nie Tian estimated that when there were only 100 spirit talismans left, the Heaven Wasteland Palace would announce the end of the sword principle competition. Fortunately, they met Qin Yang. Otherwise, with so many spirit talismans in his possession, the sword principle competition would never end. In the next few days, Nie Tian and the others were not in a hurry. They found a valley and cultivated separately. Whoa! 5 days later, a distant horn sounded, spreading throughout the forbidden domain of Heaven Wasteland. The horn of Heaven Wasteland, the sword principle competition, is over. Han Ling stood up, his face filled with joy. The sound of the horn of Heaven Wasteland signified the end of the sword principle competition. "Let's go out." Nie Tian also stood up, smiled faintly, and prepared to leave the forbidden domain of Heaven Wasteland. The sword principle competition this time, because of the existence of the 13 swords of Heavenly Wasteland, Yin Jiwei and the others, was much more bloody. However, the 13 swords of Heavenly Wasteland had all died tragically, and Yin Jiwei would definitely restrain himself after being shocked by Nie Tian. Therefore, most of the swordsmen were able to keep their lives thanks to Nie Tian and the others. The crowd walked out of the valley, raised their heads, and saw a huge crack in the sword formation in the sky, apparently to let the swordsmen out. Countless figures soared into the sky, and left the forbidden domain of Heaven Wasteland through the crack in the sword formation. At this time, there were obviously fewer swordsmen, and soon, all of them walked out. Nie Tian and the others came out of the forbidden domain of Heaven Wasteland, and stood in the sky. In the distance, dozens of black-robed swordsmen appeared. All the swordsmen who participated in the sword principle competition flew towards these black-robed swordsmen. The black-robed swordsmen were from the Heaven Wasteland Hall. The swordsmen walked over one by one, handed over the spirit talismans in their hands, and exchanged for a black token. This black token was the proof to enter the ancient sword tomb. Nie Tian and the rest also walked over, and each received a token. Huh! At this time, Nie Tian saw Qin Yang's figure appear. He actually also used a spirit talisman to exchange for a token. Furthermore, he had a happy look. Looks like this guy snatched other people's spirit talismans again. His luck is really not bad. Nie Tian shook his head and said in his heart. Qin Yang also discovered Nie Tian at this time, and his gaze could not help trembling violently. Clearly, he was badly frightened. Nie Tian smiled faintly and did not have the intention of making a move. Just coming out of the forbidden domain of Heaven Wasteland, Nie Tian detected that there were many auras lurking in the void. There were even a few auras that were abnormally powerful, seemingly having 9th-level Heavenly Emperor's strength. Nie Tian knew that these were all the powerhouses of the 9 great sword sects, each protecting their own sword sects people. These swordsmen could die inside the forbidden domain of Heaven Wasteland, but after exiting the forbidden domain, they would receive protection. At this time, most of the swordsmen were glaring at each other. Looks like there were many exchanges in the forbidden domain, sowing enmity between each other. 3 days later, everyone entered the ancient sword tomb with the Heaven Wasteland token. A black-robed old man from the Heaven Wasteland Hall opened his mouth solemnly and said with a cold look. Nie Tian gave that old man a glance. The latter actually had 9th-level Heavenly Emperor's strength. His status in the Heaven Wasteland Hall was absolutely not low. This my Lord Hall Master invites you over. I wonder if you can do me the honor. Nie Tian did not want to delay and was preparing to leave. But right at this time, a voice actually sounded out in his mind. Chapter 12:20. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he looked at the black-clothed old man. He did not expect the other party to make such a move. Nie Tian did not expect the Hall Master of the Heaven Wasteland Hall to want to see him. He thought to himself, I killed someone from the Heaven Wasteland Hall, but Song Shanshu wants to see me at this time. This trip is too dangerous, I must not go. Nie Tian smiled faintly and replied, Thank you for the invitation, Hall Master Song Shanshu, but I still have urgent matters to deal with, so I can only go next time. The black-clothed old man did not say it out loud, but transmitted his voice to Nie Tian, indicating that he did not want to make it public. Therefore, if Nie Tian did not go, the other party might force him. Moreover, if the people of the Heaven Wasteland Hall used forceful means in front of so many swordsmen, it would be a joke to the world. Lord Aojian, when did you become so careful? Suddenly, the black-clothed old man laughed and transmitted his voice. Nie Tian's expression suddenly changed and his pupils involuntarily constricted. Since the other party directly called him Lord Aojian, it was obvious that he already knew his identity. Nie Tian's title in his previous life was Daynite Proud Sword. Lord Aojian, my hall master is currently in the Heaven Wasteland restaurant. You can find him with the token in your hand. The black-clothed old man transmitted his voice again and said, Hall Master said that he only wants to meet you and has no other intentions. As for whether you want to meet him or not, it's up to you. The black-clothed old man said expressionlessly, but his eyes were looking elsewhere. He was extremely cautious, afraid that others would see that he was talking to Nie Tian. I know. Nie Tian calmed down and responded indifferently. It seemed that the matter was more complicated than he had imagined. Song Shanshu already knew his identity, and the meeting was very strange. It was not in the Heaven Wasteland Hall, but in the Heaven Wasteland restaurant. It seemed that Song Shanshu did not want others to know about his meeting with Nie Tian, so he arranged for it to be in the Heaven Wasteland restaurant. However, Nie Tian was still worried. Even though the black-robed elder said that Song Shanshu only wanted to meet him and had no other intentions, Nie Tian was still worried. Nie Tian was not a 3-year-old child. He had just killed so many people from the Heaven Wasteland Hall, and Song Shanshu immediately wanted to see him. How could such a meeting not have any ulterior motives? Reason told Nie Tian that he couldn't go to this meeting. But he was also very curious. How did Song Shanshu know his identity, and what was the purpose of this meeting? Nie Tian had never interacted with Song Shan Shui in his previous life. They only knew of each other's existence, but they had never even met face to face. Go? Or not? Nie Tian was hesitant. He was worried that this was a trap, but he was also worried that he would miss something. Master Ao Jian, farewell. At this moment, the black-clothed old man spoke indifferently before leading the other members of the Heaven Desolate Hall away in an extremely calm manner. Nie Tian involuntarily shook his head, feeling a huge headache. Let's leave this place first, Nie Tian said in his heart, preparing to leave first. Either way, he was not in a hurry. If Song Shan Shui attached great importance to this meeting, he believed that he would give him some time to consider. Stinking brat, we meet again. Just as Nie Tian and the rest were preparing to leave, a figure suddenly appeared, descending from the sky and blocking the way. It's you again, you mad dog. Nie Tian raised his head to look at the person in front of him, his gaze involuntarily darkening. It was Yin Jiwei again. But the next instant, Nie Tian's gaze turned, immediately locking onto the middle-aged man in green beside Yin Jiwei. This person's aura was deep and very restrained. A faintly discernible sword intent surged around him, very strange. 9th level Heavenly Emperor strength. This person is an expert from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Nie Tian's divine sense moved, sensing the strength of the green-clothed man. His gaze involuntarily tightened, feeling surprised in his heart. Second uncle, it's this kid. Inside his body there's... Yin Jiwei smiled cold. He only said half of his words, the other half was clearly transmitted to the green-clothed man. Dragon! The green-clothed man's gaze suddenly flickered, and he cried out in shock, but it came to an abrupt stop. Crap! Nie Tian's brows raised up, and he could not help laughing bitterly. He immediately guessed that Yin Jiwei must have told the green-clothed man about the dragon vein in his body. The supreme dragon vein was too powerful. Nie Tian would not use it easily, fearing that it would incite other people's covetous hearts. Not being able to kill Yin Jiwei back then was definitely a miscalculation. Fortunately, Yin Jiwei did not plan on making the matter of the dragon vein public, but only told this green-clothed man. You're Yin Gufeng? Nie Tian became cold, looked at the green-clothed man in front of him, and asked. Since Yin Jiwei addressed this person as second uncle, he must be Yin Guqing's younger brother, Yin Gufeng. Nie Tian had only heard of this name, but he had never met him before. Yin Gufeng's lips twitched as he said coldly, Lad, since you know my name, stop struggling. Come with me. The others behind Nie Tian immediately tensed up. They all knew the name Yin Gufeng. He was the Vice Pavilion Master of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, and he was ranked 19th on the Heavenly Sword Excellence Board. In the Celestial Realm, swordsmen who could enter the Heavenly Sword Excellence Board were all geniuses of the sword, and those who could enter the top 20 were all renowned swordsmen. Even though Yin Gufeng's name was not as famous as Yin Guqing's, he was still a fearsome swordsman. The other swordsmen gathered around, and most of their gazes were focused on Yin Gufeng with deep fear. They had no idea how Nie Tian had offended Yin Gufeng and his nephew, but they knew that Nie Tian was doomed. The Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was second only to the Heaven Wasteland Hall among the 9 great sword sects. Anyone who offended the Yin clan would not have a good ending. Go with you. At this moment, Nie Tian seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly laughed weirdly and said, Yin Gufeng, you're too arrogant. I'm afraid that someone won't let me go with you. Yin Gufeng was taken aback. He quickly scanned the crowd, but he didn't find anyone suspicious. He couldn't help but laugh. Brat, you're just trying to act mysterious. Do you really think I'll be afraid of you? Yin Gufeng thought that someone was protecting Nie Tian, but he didn't sense any powerful aura, so he assumed that the latter was just bluffing. Yin Gufeng, I'll give you one word, scram. Just as he finished his words, a voice boomed out from the void. It was majestic and deep, like the rumbling of thunder. What a terrifying aura! The crowd felt as if thunder had exploded in their ears. A terrifying aura descended, overwhelming and unstoppable. Everyone looked around in panic, but they could only see empty space. There was no one there. Who are you? Goofing's eyes darkened, but he still maintained his composure. Even if you don't put me in your eyes, the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion isn't that easy to bully. Goofing could vaguely sense that the newcomer was an extremely fearsome opponent. He didn't dare to underestimate the other party, so he brought up the name of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion in hopes of intimidating the other party. The Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion? The thunderous voice boomed in the void once more. This time it was filled with disdain. Go back and ask Goofing if he dares to speak to me in such a manner. Boom! In the instant that the thunderous voice rang out, a sword shadow abruptly appeared. It whistled through the air like a phantom, and it glowed with a dark red light. Chapter 12:21. The scene that suddenly happened in the void made everyone petrified on the spot. The scene fell into a dead silence. Countless gazes stared straight at the void, completely not knowing what was going on in front of them. Goofing was a 9th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist. Furthermore, he was in existence in the top 20 of the Heavenly Sword Wind list. He was actually blasted flying by someone with one sword and did not even have any strength to retaliate. Just who was the person in the void? How could he be so powerful? Goofing, get lost. Do you guys think you're stronger than him? At this time, the sound of thunder sounded out in the void again, bringing along a strong aura pressure. Everyone felt their chest tighten. There were actually many people who could not withstand the powerful aura pressure and vomited blood. The group of people exchanged glances. Among them, there was indeed no one stronger than Goofing. Their eyes involuntarily revealed a look of terror. Then why haven't you scrammed yet? In the next instant, a violent voice sounded out again. Following that, a black-clothed figure appeared in the void. His entire body's aura was like a mountain, standing tall in the sky. He was like a giant sword that could split heaven and earth, sharp to the extreme. That figure was like a deity descending to the world, overlooking everyone. Under that insolent gaze, no one actually dared to meet his eyes. Only at this time did everyone react. Countless figures immediately flickered and disappeared instantly. Ha ha ha! Seeing this scene, that person actually laughed out loud like a child and said, "That's more like it." There are still a few hidden old fellows. You guys get lost too. But in the next instant the newcomer's gaze turned grim. His body released several sword intent. Like swords leaving the bow, they rumbled towards the void. Bang! 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 After several muffled sounds, accompanied by muffled groans, a few figures appeared, looking at that person with miserable expressions. Their eyes were extremely fearful. Who are you? Could it be that this world belongs to you? We are hiding in the void. What does it have to do with you? One of the gray-clothed swordsmen had a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He actually still dared to speak and shouted loudly. Since I came here, this world is mine. You can only stay if I let you be here. Not letting you be here, you have to scram. However, that person was unreasonable. With a furious roar, thunder rumbled. A violent aura wreaked havoc in the space like a tsunami, directly blasting the person who spoke out backward. When the others saw this, they immediately panicked. How could they dare to stay for even a moment longer? They all left. These old fellows were the old monsters of the various great sword sections. They had come to protect the swordsmen of their respective sword sects, but they did not expect to be chased away by someone. In the blink of an eye, only Nye Tian and the others were left in the originally crowded space. The people behind Nye Tian looked at the man in shock, too nervous to speak. "Teacher!" However, at this moment, Ren Hong called out in surprise and excitement. "Teacher!" Han Ling and the others were stunned, and then they understood. The person before them was none other than Ren Hong's teacher, the Sword Emperor of the West, Jiu Qiansheng. Lu Haoyu, Han Ling, and the others all recognized Jiu Qianxing. However, they didn't dare to raise their heads to look at him. His aura was too powerful. Brother Jiu, you're still the same. Nie Tian smiled faintly as he calmly looked at the person in front of him. Various scenes from the past surfaced in his mind. Jiu Qianxing was one of Nie Tian's closest friends in his previous life. 100 years had passed, and his old friend had not changed. His gratification was indescribable. Brother Nie Tian, I knew that you wouldn't die. Ha! Jiu Qianxing laughed loudly. His figure moved, and he directly landed beside Nie Tian. The aura around him dispersed, but his sharp eyes couldn't help but flash. He then laughed strangely and said, Brother Nie Tian, your appearance is a bit terrible. Nie Tian's face was full of black lines. He felt quite good about himself. Following that, Rennie Hong and the others came over to greet him respectfully. However, Jiu Qianxing ignored them all. His eyes were fixed on Nie Tian. Nie Tian knew Jiu Qianxing's character well. He didn't care about trifles, and he didn't care about anything. If it was someone else, they would at least have some reaction when faced with the respect of a junior. However, Jiu Qianxing only cared about the things he cared about. These empty greetings were nothing to him. Jiu Qianxing once said before, so what if you call me Lord? I won't really become bigger either. If you call me a vile person, I won't become small either. It was not that Jiu Qianxing looked down on these people, but his personality was like this. If it were the other way around, Han Ling and the rest not greeting him, he similarly did not care. Brother Jiu, long time no see, you're still so domineering, huh? Nie Tian shook his head and smiled, unable to conceal his excitement. How is this considered domineering? But Jiu Qianxing chuckled and said, if I were really domineering, how could those people leave alive? The corners of Nie Tian's mouth twitched, and he was actually speechless. Jiu Qianxing just did not want others to see the scene of him reuniting with Nie Tian. Hence, that was why he chased everyone away. If Jiu Qianxing really made a move, Yin Gufeng and the rest would not be able to survive even if they had 10,000 lives. Yin Gufeng was a 9th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artist too. But his true combat power was worlds apart compared to Jiu Qianxing, this kind of true peak. Yihong, you juniors should go and play. I have something to say to Brother Nie Tian. After a moment, Jiu Qianxing calmed down. He glanced at Rennie Hong and spoke indifferently. Yes, Rennie Hong answered. He signaled with his eyes and left with the others. Nie Tian, on the other hand, was a little worried. If someone were to harm Rennie Hong and the others, it would be terrible. Don't worry. Even a fool would know that Jiu Qianxing has arrived. If anyone dares to make a move against my disciples in Tianhuang City, then they will be courting death. Jiu Qianxing obviously knew what Nie Tian was thinking. He chuckled and said. Nie Tian raised his eyebrows and immediately understood. Jiu Qianxing was a man who was crude but also meticulous. He looked rash on the surface, but he was actually very shrewd. A person who could reach the peak of the heaven realm could not be a fool. Rennie Hong and the others then left, leaving only Nie Tian and Jiu Qianxing in the void. Brother Jiu, do you have something to tell me? Nie Tian saw that Jiu Qianxing's expression was a little serious. Moreover, he had sent Rennie Hong and the others away. It was obvious that he had something to tell him. Not at the moment. We are old friends. Let's not talk about anything else. Let's get drunk first. Jiu Qianxing hesitated for a moment and laughed. He said in his heart, Nie Tian, there are some things that I can't tell you now. When Brother Mo arrives, we will tell you together. Okay. Nie Tian guessed that what Jiu Qianxing wanted to tell him was very important. Therefore, he was being very careful. Perhaps it was not the right time yet, so he could not force it. Millennium Dukong, I have prepared it. Jiu Qianxing laughed. He took out hundreds of jars of strong liquor and floated beside the two of them. Okay, let's get drunk today. Nie Tian also laughed. He reached out his hand and took a jar of wine. He drank to his heart's content. Actually, with the two of them's strength, it was impossible for them to get drunk. However, it was not the wine that intoxicated them. People would get drunk if they encountered something good. Even if they could not get drunk, their hearts would get drunk. Chapter 12:22. After an unknown amount of time, the wine jars beside Nie Tian and Jiu Qianxing were all emptied. The two were drunk, but their consciousness was still clear. It's so refreshing to drink with old friends. It's a pity that old Mo isn't here. Jiu Qianxing laughed and suddenly said, "If Brother Mo was here, he would just watch us drink." Nie Tian laughed. He knew that Mo Qianjun had a strange habit. He never drank. Even when the three of them were together, only Nie Tian and Jiu Qianxing drank. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qianxing's personalities were a bit extreme. It was hard to believe that two people like them could be best friends. Old Mo is too stubborn. I heard that Han Ling was humiliated by the sword observation C, but old Mo didn't even fart. It's so infuriating. Jiu Qianxing suddenly brought up this matter and said angrily, Han Ling is not very talented, but he is old Mo's disciple. Since old Mo won't let it go, I'll do it for him. Isn't it just a sword observation C? If he angers me, I'll flatten him. Nie Tian was speechless. This fart was indeed a bit ridiculous. However, Mo Qianjun had his own plans. He knew that even if he did it for Han Ling, the latter would still have inner demons in his heart. To completely eliminate the inner demons, Han Ling had to do it himself. He had to defeat the person who humiliated him. Jiu Qianxing still didn't know that Nie Tian had already balanced the 5 elements for Han Ling. In the future, Han Ling would rise against the trend. Oh no! At this time, Nie Tian suddenly thought of something and screamed. His blurred eyes suddenly became clear. Huh! Jiu Qianxing was startled. He also woke up and asked, "What's wrong?" "I have an appointment with someone. I almost forgot." Nie Tian smiled bitterly and said, "I wonder if that person is still here." He suddenly remembered that he had another meeting with Zhang Shanxue. Previously, Nie Tian was worried that it was a trap, so he hesitated whether to go or not. But now that Jiu Qianxing was here, even if it was a trap, it didn't matter. With Jiu Qianxing here, Zhang Shanxue couldn't do anything. "You have an appointment?" Jiu Qianxing was stunned again, but he chuckled and said, "You look so nervous. Could it be a woman?" Nie Tian was slightly speechless and said seriously, "It's a big shot, but I don't know why he wants to see me, so I need you to go with me." "Important people?" Jiu Qianxing laughed and said, "I like interacting with important people." For Nie Tian to call someone important, his identity must not be simple. "All right, let's go." Nie Tian nodded slightly and left without further delay. A moment later, the two figures appeared in the desolate Heaven restaurant. Jiu Qianxing restrained his aura. He was extremely famous, but not many people had actually seen him, so no one recognized him. "I'm looking for someone," Nie Tian said as he took out his command medallion. The old man from the Heaven Wasteland Hall had said that he could find Zhang Shanxue with this token. Only now did Nie Tian realize that there was a sword aura on his command medallion. It was very weak, but it truly existed. "Please come with me." The deacon looked at Nie Tian with a puzzled expression. Nie Tian nodded. It seemed that Zhang Shanxue was still in the desolate Heaven restaurant. To be able to patiently wait for Nie Tian for such a long time, it seemed that Zhang Shanxue indeed had something important to find Nie Tian. Entering the 3rd floor of the restaurant, there were obviously fewer people. "Mister, my lord only wants to see you, please wait outside." Arriving in front of a private room, the attendant stopped Jiu Qianxing and said indifferently, "You don't want me to see him?" Jiu Qianxing was startled for a moment, then he said, "All right, I'll wait outside." Jiu Qianxing was one of the top figures in the Heaven realm, but he actually couldn't even enter the door. If this was seen by others, they would definitely laugh their heads off. Fortunately, Jiu Qianxing was not a person who cared about trifles, so he didn't care about this at all. Be careful. Before Nie Tian entered, Jiu Qianxing sent a voice transmission to Nie Tian. Those two are very strong. Either of them is as strong as me. Jiu Qianxing was a little confused. Who was it that Nie Tian wanted to see? How could their strength be so scary? Jiu Qianxing had basically dealt with all the top figures in the heaven realm, but these two people were actually completely unfamiliar with their auras. It was very strange. Yes. Nie Tian nodded slightly and became more cautious. He didn't expect that there was actually another person other than Song Shanxue that he wanted to see this time. Could it be? Nie Tian confirmed that the two auras inside were very unfamiliar and not Duguanai. He suddenly thought of someone and his eyes couldn't help but flicker. No matter how scary the people inside were, since he was here, he couldn't back down. Lord Ao Jian, Lord Sword Emperor, I didn't expect that a small desolate heaven restaurant would actually welcome two peak swordsmen. Come in together. Just as Nie Tian was about to enter, a low voice sounded in his mind. Jiu Qianxing also heard this voice. He glanced at Nie Tian and then followed them in. The two entered the room. In front of an ordinary table, there were two figures, one sitting and the other standing. The one standing was a middle-aged man with a long beard. He was dressed in white and looked elegant and humble. However, his eyes were extremely deep, as if there was a huge secret hidden in them. The person sitting there was a gray-clothed old man. His figure was thin, and as he sat there, he seemed like a skeleton. His face was aged, and he was like a candle in the wind. However, his gaze was extremely fierce, like a bottomless abyss that caused others to fall into it with a single glance and be unable to struggle free. Old man Tian Huang, Lord Song Shanxue, it's an honor to meet you. Nie Tian's gaze swept across the two and he smiled faintly. He had already guessed that the two people in front of him were the two giants of the desolate heaven hall, Old Man Tian Huang and Song Shanxue. Old Man Tian Huang was Song Shanxue's teacher. It was not strange for the latter to be extremely respectful in front of the former. So it's the two of you. No wonder you're so strong. Jiu Qianxing laughed. I've long heard that Lord Song's strength is not below Dugunese. It seems that the rumors are true. Lord Sword Emperor is too polite. Song Shanxue smiled faintly. Compared to my junior brother, I'm still lacking. He is the publicly acknowledged pinnacle of the sword Dao in the heaven realm, but I can only be a little lord. Jiu Qianxing raised his brows. He did not expect Song Shanxue to be so humble. The lord of the desolate heaven hall was not a little lord. He was the leader of the 9 great sword sect. His status was not lower than the pinnacle of the sword Dao. Nie Tian, Jiu Qianxing, Old Man Tian Huang and Song Shanxue were all pinnacle figures of the sword Dao. This meeting could be said to be a gathering of the pinnacle. Both of you, please take a seat. At this time, Old Man Tian Huang, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. His voice was faint and intermittent, as if it was a sigh from hell. Nie Tian and Jiu Qianxing did not stand on ceremony and directly sat down. Nie Tian got straight to the point and said, Mr. Tian Huang, now that you're here, why don't you get straight to the point? Chapter 12:23. In the sword battle, Nie Tian killed someone from the Heaven Wasteland Hall. But such a small matter was far from enough for Elder Tian Wasteland to appear. Song Shanxue must have other matters to discuss with Nie Tian. Lord Ao Jian, I have not shown my face for a long time, but I have heard of your fame. To reach the pinnacle of Sword Dao before the age of 100, you are definitely the #1 swordsman in the heaven realm in 1,000 years. Elder Tian Wasteland lifted his drooping eyelids, his gaze sweeping across Nie Tian, revealing a look of reverence. Old Mister is too kind. Nie Tian smiled faintly and responded politely. I do not casually praise people. The number of people in the heaven realm who can receive I's praise can't be counted on one hand. Elder Tion Wasteland laughed, then said, "It's just a pity that such a prodigy fell at such a young age. It's really a loss for my heaven realm." Nye Tion's gaze narrowed slightly, not wanting to listen to Elder Tion Wasteland's nonsense. "Old mister, I respect you as a senior of Sword Dao, please speak your mind." "All right." Elder Tion Wasteland nodded slightly, saying, "A few days ago, Song Shanxue made a mistake. I want to make a deal with Lord Aojian to make up for the mistake he made." "What do you mean?" Nye Tion was stunned for a moment, but a hint of joy flashed across his eyes. He had long seen that Elder Tion Wasteland obviously had something to ask of him by talking a lot of nonsense. It was just that he did not know what the other party needed to ask of him with such a high status. Nye Tion used to have a very high status, but the current him was just a martial artist with the strength of a 5th-level heavenly emperor. Compared to Elder Tion Wasteland, there was a huge gap. Lord Aojian. At this time, Song Shanxue spoke, recounting what happened between him and Dugunai previously, and finally said, "Although Dugunai is a member of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, he schemed against the Heaven Wasteland Hall at every turn. It's really unbearable." "I see." After listening to Song Shanxue's explanation, Nye Tion understood a lot. He now knew that it was Dugunai who leaked the news that he was still alive. Dugunai was indeed colluding with Luo Chenhun. Dugunai was indeed ruthless. He actually wanted to drag the Heaven Wasteland Hall down with him. "Dugunai." Jiuqian Sheng was slightly agitated. He growled in a low voice, "If I see this person again, I'll definitely kill him." Nye Tion cast a glance at Jiuqian Sheng and told him to calm down. Dugunai was no ordinary person, and he was about as strong as Jiuqian Sheng. If the two of them fought to the death, it would be hard to say what the outcome would be. According to what Song Shanxue said, the current Dugunai was already 9th-level Heavenly Emperor strength. His true combat power might have already surpassed Jiuqian Sheng and the rest. Dugunai was the only person among the 100 Void Physique who reached the peak before reaching the 9th-level Heavenly Emperor realm. At this time, his strength reached the peak. The might of his combat power was hard to estimate. Song Shanxue admitting that he was a notch weaker than Dugunai was absolutely not saying it modestly. How could a person whose strength reached such a boundary easily admit that he was weaker than others? Mr. Heaven Wasteland, Hall Master Tsongshan, in that case, a great change in the heaven realm in the future, you guys choose to stand on my side, is that right? Nye Tion thought for a bit and asked coolly. Since Nye Tion returned, there would surely be a great change in the Heaven Realm's divine realm in the future. The Heaven Wasteland Hall originally had the chance to stay out of it, but because Tsongshan Shui was dragged into the water by Duguanai, it resulted in the Heaven Wasteland Hall having to take a side. Luo Chenhun and Nye Tion, one of the two. Yes. Elder Heaven Wasteland nodded calmly. Tsongshan Shui did not speak. Actually, he was more inclined to stand on Luo Chenhuan's side. But Elder Heaven Wasteland wanted to choose Nye Tion. Can I know why? Nye Tion asked with a serious expression. In terms of strength, Luo Chenhun was much stronger than Nye Tion. Moreover, Nye Tion faintly felt that there must be someone behind Luo Chenhun, otherwise he would not be able to mobilize an expert like Duguanai. The new generation replaces the old. No one can change this trend. Elder Heaven Wasteland's old face revealed a strange smile. His deep eyes tightly stared at Nye Tion. I believe that a person who can reincarnate and be reborn, the #1 swordsman in the Heaven Realm's divine realm in 1,000 years, his potential is immeasurable. Is that really the case? Nye Tion chuckled. This kind of nonsense might be able to fool children, but it was far too naive to fool Nye Tion. Nye Tion was not the kind of person who would become complacent after a few words of praise. In this world, only strength was #1. Before potential became strength, it would never be able to represent strength. Lord Aojian. Elder Heaven Wasteland frowned, his sharp eyes flickered for a moment before he finally said, I have no choice but to choose you. Because Luo Chunhun cannot be chosen. I understand. Nie Tian laughed. Elder Heaven Wasteland's thoughts were the same as his. Although Luo Chunhun was strong, he could not be chosen. From the fact that Luo Chunhun killed Nie Tian, it could be seen that he was not a person who could work with him. If Heaven Wasteland Hall stood on Luo Chunhun's side and waited for Luo Chunhun to kill Nie Tian, perhaps Heaven Wasteland Hall would be destroyed next. Therefore, Heaven Wasteland Hall could only choose Nie Tian and live and die together with him. At least if Nie Tian won, he would definitely not destroy Heaven Wasteland Hall. If he chose Luo Chunhun, he would definitely die. If he chose Nie Tian, there would at least be a chance. Elder Heaven Wasteland had lived for nearly 1,000 years, so he still had this bit of judgment. Since Lord Aojian's doubts have been resolved, can we talk about the deal? Elder Heaven Wasteland forced a smile and said, All right. Nie Tian was very willing. I like to make deals with smart people. Elder Heaven Wasteland nodded and said directly, From now on, Heaven Wasteland Hall and Lord Aojian are allies. Heaven Wasteland Hall can do 3 things for Lord Aojian. If Lord Aojian rules the Heaven Domain in the future, ensure that the status of Heaven Wasteland Hall will not change. How about it? 3 things in exchange for the survival of Heaven Wasteland Hall. This deal is not bad. Nie Tian pondered for a moment before smiling faintly. Elder Heaven Wasteland also smiled and said, These 3 things must be within the scope of Heaven Wasteland Hall's ability. Heaven Wasteland Hall can't do things that are too big. These words had to be said, otherwise it would be impossible for Nie Tian to let Heaven Wasteland Hall kill the Snow Emperor. Understood. Nie Tian laughed and said, Then I will say the first thing first. I want Heaven Wasteland Hall to help me protect 2 people. Protect? Elder Heaven Wasteland was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, Lord Aojian, please speak. The 2 of them are currently in the Divine Cold Palace and are under the protection of Lord Frost Emperor. However, I'm still worried, so I want to ask the Heaven Wasteland Palace to send someone to keep an eye on them. Don't let anything slip, Nie Tian said seriously. He had a premonition that the Heaven Realm's divine domain was about to face a storm. Mo Rushi and Cher were temporarily safe with Cold Emperor, but that was not certain in the future. Sure. Elder Heaven Wasteland readily agreed. What I said is to let Hall Master Tsang Shanshue personally protect them, and to never leave their side for even a moment. It is best not to let them find out. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched as he said seriously. This. Tsang Shanshue was stunned. He did not expect Nie Tian to make such a request. He, the dignified Hall Master of Heaven Wasteland Hall, actually had to be a guard for someone, and to never leave their side. This was too outrageous. Chapter 12:24. Nie Tian's first condition, which was for Tsang Shanshue to personally protect Mo Rushi and Cher, was out of many considerations. First, he indeed had to be more careful to ensure the safety of the 2 girls, and secondly, he wanted to test the sincerity of the Heaven Wasteland Hall. This matter was not difficult, but it was difficult to see if the Heaven Wasteland Hall really cared about their alliance with Nie Tian. Nie Tian was somewhat surprised that Elder Tian Wasteland agreed so quickly. Seeing that Elder Tian Wasteland had already agreed, Tsang Shanshue could only silently accept. Who asked him to cause trouble? If protecting the 2 of them could ensure the future of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, then it was nothing much. Lord Aojian, I agreed to your first request, what about the other 2? Elder Tian Wasteland nodded slightly and continued to ask. He hoped that Nie Tian could directly state the 3 matters, so that he would have some confidence. However, Nie Tian would not so easily say all 3 matters. He said with a faint smile, There are still 2 matters that I have not thought about. When I have thought about it, I will go back and find you. Okay. Elder Tian Wasteland nodded, took out a token, and handed it to Nye Tian. This is the Heaven Wasteland Ageless Token. With this token, you can find me at the Heaven Wasteland Hall. Thank you. Nye Tian received the token and calmly put it away. The Heaven Wasteland Ageless Token was a good thing. As far as he knew, it could command any swordsman of the Heaven Wasteland Hall other than the Hall Master. Sang Shanxue, let's go. Elder Tian Wasteland did not delay any longer and prepared to leave immediately. The meeting between them and Nye Tian was carried out in secret, so of course they did not want others to know. Hall Master Tsang, the sword way competition was a trap. Is the ancient sword tomb also a trap? At this time, Nye Tian suddenly sneered and asked in a deep voice. This. Sang Shanxue was a little embarrassed. The sword way competition was an accident. Please do not take offense, Lord Ao Jian. As the Hall Master of the Heaven Wasteland Hall, I had no choice but to do this. Is it a last resort? Nye Tian laughed and said in a cold voice, Hall Master Tsang, let me tell you something. If the Heaven Wasteland Palace wants to maintain its position as the head of the 9 great sword sects, it must not rely on suppressing the other sword sects, but on making itself stronger. If the Heaven Wasteland Hall itself declines, what's the use of suppressing the other sword sects? Sang Shanxue's expression was a little ugly, but he did not say anything. Old man Tian Huang and Sang Shanxue did not stay any longer and left. The two of them were extremely cautious, retracting their auras to the extreme. Even if it was Nye Tian, if he didn't use the holographic divine imprints, it would be very difficult for him to sense how strong the two of them were. Nye Tian, can the people of the Heaven Wasteland Hall be trusted? After confirming that old man Tian Huang and Sang Shanxue had left, Jiu Qian Xing asked with a frown. He should be trustworthy. Nye Tian nodded slightly. Elder Tian Huang is a smart person, it is not surprising that he could make such a choice. But I have a feeling that he didn't say something. Maybe he knows the truth, but it's not convenient for him to say it. Jiu Qian Xing sighed. In the Heaven Domain, there are some things that only the 9 emperors know. Old man Tian Huang has lived for so long, maybe he knows something. Huh! Nye Tian was stunned for a moment. He did not expect Jiu Qian Xing to sigh. Jiu Qian Xing also did not tell Nye Tian some things. He was still waiting for the right time. Nye Tian, what do you plan to do next? Jiu Qian Xing's expression became slightly serious as he asked. My current strength is too weak, I need to increase my strength first. I have a premonition that the matter of me being killed back then is not so simple, maybe there is a bigger secret behind it. Nye Tian nodded, his eyes flickering with a blazing light. Since he had returned to the Heaven Domain, the matter of that year must be investigated thoroughly, and his identity must also be clarified. Nye Tian, if I told you not to investigate the matter of that year, would you agree? Jiu Qian Xing's expression darkened as he suddenly said, Nye Tian was stunned for a moment, then smiled. Brother Jiu, do you think it's possible? Impossible. Jiu Qian Xing shook his head with a bitter smile, then he patted Nye Tian's shoulder and said solemnly, Nye Tian, no matter what happens in the Heaven Domain, I will bear it with you. Okay. Nye Tian nodded. There was no need to thank a close friend. Next, Nye Tian and Jiu Qian Xing left the Heaven Wasteland restaurant. The matter of the sword principal competition spread like wildfire. Swordsmen from various sword sects were furious when they found out that the Heaven Wasteland Palace had arranged assassins in the forbidden region of Heaven Wasteland. However, the Heaven Wasteland Palace did not come out to explain anything, these matters were no longer the most important to them. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. A large group of swordsmen gathered at the periphery of the Heaven Wasteland mountain range. Today was the day that the swordsmen of the sword principal competition would enter the ancient sword tomb. Although only 100 people were qualified to enter the ancient sword tomb, it attracted a large number of swordsmen to come and watch. Nie Tian and the others stood among the crowd, appearing inconspicuous. Mister, how long will it take for us to come out after entering the sword tomb this time? Han Ling was slightly nervous and asked Nie Tian. If everything goes smoothly, just a few days. If it doesn't, then it's hard to say. Nie Tian said nonchalantly. He already made a decision in his heart to definitely help Han Ling, Kong Shibua, and the rest find suitable sword Dao inheritance. This was his main objective for entering the sword tomb. The secondary objective was to find an ancient sword for himself. It would be best if it could be compatible with the attributes of the sword Absolute Heaven Slash. Nie Tian didn't need the legacy of the Tao of Sword. He had 4 sword intents inside of him, and each of them was at the peak of the sword intent. Even the legacy of the sword intent from the ancient times couldn't tempt him. Nie Tian was very cautious at this moment. Spreading out his divine sense, he immediately discovered that there were many powerful auras concealed in the crowd. Many were 9th-level Heavenly Emperor martial artists. Looks like the people of the 9 great sword sects regarded the ancient sword tomb with great importance this time. They all sent out the powerhouses in their sects to guard. But after entering the sword tomb, whether or not one could obtain the sword Tao inheritance would depend on one's ability. After a while, the people from the Heaven Desolate Hall appeared. It was those dozens of black-clothed swordsmen again. The person in the lead was the person who informed Nie Tian and Song Shanxue about the meeting back then. When that person saw Nie Tian, he nodded slightly with respect. Everyone, after handing over the token in your hands, you can enter the Heaven Desolate mountain range. The people from the Heaven Desolate Hall will bring you to the sword tomb. The black-clothed old man opened his mouth indifferently. His voice was not loud, but it sounded in everyone's ears very clearly. The swordsmen with tokens in their hands were all very excited. One by one, they went forward, handed over their tokens, and stepped into the Heaven Desolate mountain range. Those who didn't have a token could only watch with eyes full of envy, jealousy, and hatred. Being able to enter the ancient sword tomb was a chance for swordsmen to be reborn. If they could obtain the sword Tao inheritance, it was very likely that they would become a pinnacle existence in the future. Those swordsmen clearly entered according to the sections. Apart from the Heaven Desolate Hall, the people from the 8 great sword sects accounted for more than half. Only a small half were swordsmen from the small sect. Chapter 12:25. Nie Tian's gaze landed on that golden-haired man and could not help but flicker. This was a young swordsman around 100 years old. However, what he released was not the sharpness of a swordsman, but an extremely tyrannical aura. It was extremely powerful and oppressive. The people around him were subconsciously pushed away by this aura and could not get within 5 meters of him. Nie Tian sensed a powerful bloodline power from this person. It was even stronger than the bloodline martial artists he met previously. It seemed like even Lin Yi, who merged the bloodline power of the Mystic and Moon clans, could not compare to him. Furthermore, such strength was very strong too. He was actually a 7th-level Heavenly Emperor, the advanced sword profundity realm. He was even stronger than Lu Haoyu, Xiao Yun, and the rest. Only Ren Yihong could compare to him. "Mister, what's wrong?" Han Ling could not help but ask when he sensed Nie Tian's gaze was strange. "Han Ling, who is that golden-haired swordsman?" Nie Tian's lips twitched as he asked. "I don't know." Han Ling shook his head. He did not know that person. He did not know many people. Most of them had only heard of their names and had never seen them in person. "He is Chen Tianla, a member of the Chen family sword union." At this moment Lu Haoyu spoke. He was clearly more experienced than Han Ling. He said, "This person is ranked 28th on the Sky Sword Excellence list. Rumor has it that he is even stronger than Yin Jiwei." Chen Family Sword Union. Nie Tian looked at Chen Tianla and smiled faintly. The Chen Family Sword Union was one of the 9 major sword sects and ranked 4th among them. Chen Tianla was very strong. In addition to the bloodline power in his body, it was not strange for him to be ranked ahead of Yin Jiwei. Soon, it was Nie Tian's turn. After handing over the token, they successfully entered the infinite desolate mountain range. Jiu Qianxing did not appear here. Nie Tian was currently very safe in the infinite desolate city. There was no need for him to follow him. After entering the infinite desolate mountain range, 100 swordsmen and 20 swordsmen from the Heaven Desolate Temple entered the ancient sword tomb together. The ancient sword tomb opened in the infinite desolate mountain range after all. The Heaven Desolate Temple's swordsmen did not participate in the sword Dao competition, but they could still arrange for 20 people to enter the ancient sword tomb. The 120 swordsmen quickly arrived at a secluded area. Nie Tian discovered that the surrounding light was clearly much weaker, and the air was filled with an ancient and gloomy aura. Continuing forward, a vast gorge appeared. A powerful sword formation emanated from within, giving off a great sense of pressure. The aura of the ancient sword formation, it really is the ancient sword tomb. Nie Tian felt the pressure of the sword formation and his eyes narrowed slightly, flashing with great joy. The aura of the sword formation was very strong, but it was relatively weak, which meant that the sword tomb had existed for a very long time, at least hundreds of thousands of years. As time passed, any spiritual array's aura would slowly weaken. Unless it was a heaven-shaking method like the Ice and Fire Grand Array, which used the spiritual pool of heaven and earth as the core of the array and continuously provided energy for the array wouldn't weaken. "Everyone, please," the guide said coldly when they arrived at the entrance of the canyon, indicating for the swordsmen to enter. As soon as he finished speaking, there were already people who could not wait any longer. Their figures flickered and they directly entered the canyon. The others also scrambled to be the first, afraid that they would be left behind, and jumped in one after another. Nie Tian smiled slightly and was not in a hurry. Although the ancient sword tomb was an opportunity, it also had a certain degree of risk. Who knew what kind of danger would appear inside? However, Nie Tian estimated that this sword tomb had existed for too long. At most, there would be some killing formations left, but they were not fatal. The real fatal danger came from other swordsmen. The inheritance of the sword principle was a priceless treasure for swordsmen. In order to obtain the inheritance, it was not surprising that they would fight to the death. Nie Tian and the others were almost the last to enter the canyon. The moment they entered, they felt a vast and ancient aura hit them in the face. It was like an ancient sigh, and it made them feel reverence. Is this the sword tomb? It's so magical! It was the first time that Pu Fifan and the others came to the sword tomb, and they were completely stunned by the scene in front of them. In the middle of the canyon, there were countless ancient swords floating in the air, and mysterious sword essences surged around them. The entire valley was filled with an extremely powerful sword essence. Nie Tian's gaze swept over the ancient swords in the air, and he felt the surrounding sword essence aura. The sword essence aura was not weak, but it was far from enough to condense into a sword principle inheritance. The so-called inheritance was when a powerful martial artist used their own power to communicate with heaven and earth when they died, fusing the power they comprehended with the laws of heaven and earth, and preserving it between heaven and earth. The sword principle inheritance was generally left behind by the peak ancient swordsman. To be able to obtain such a sword essence was a qualitative leap for a swordsman. There was no doubt that those who could leave behind an inheritance were all geniuses. Nie Tian did not dare to be careless. He immediately spread out his divine sense, and the holographic divine rune was activated. A holographic projection appeared in his mind, and everything within tens of thousands of meters was clearly captured by him. When the holographic projection was formed, Nie Tian immediately sensed the sword essence aura surging in the surrounding space. The sword essence aura was very weak. If it was not for Nie Tian's holographic divine rune, he would not have been able to capture it. The entire scope of the sword tomb was very large, and it was far larger than Ye Tian had expected. Many people came to the sword tomb for the first time. They were attracted by the scene in front of them, and their eyes flickered. However, Nye Tian did not delay and directly walked into the sword tomb. If there really was a sword principal inheritance, it must be in the center of the sword tomb. The center of the sword tomb was the place with the strongest sword essence. It was easier to condense sword essence, and the chances of a sword principal inheritance appearing were much higher. Ren Yihong, Lu Haoyu, pay attention to the others. Nye Tian transmitted his voice to Ren Yihong and Lu Haoyu, reminding them to protect Han Ling and the others. At this time, there were only 5 people around Nye Tian, and Xiao Yun and Shangguan Yufei were not with them. Ren Yihong and Lu Haoyu were stronger, while Han Ling, Kong Shibua, and Pu Fifan were weaker and needed protection. After a while, Nye Tian arrived at the center of the sword tomb. The sword essence aura here was much stronger, and the sword essence aura in the space was slightly stronger. Until now, Nye Tian had not figured out what kind of power the sword essence was. Although he knew it was a kind of spirit force, he did not know where this power came from. He guessed that maybe the profound meaning of the sword was not the end of the sword principle, but another beginning. After reaching the peak of the profound meaning, the swordsman's body might automatically produce sword essence, opening a new world of the sword principle. Nye Tian's divine sense swept carefully, and little by little, he sensed the sword essence light balls floating in the air. At this time, his eyes suddenly flickered, and immediately locked on to a white sword essence light ball. The sword essence light ball's aura was obviously stronger than the other sword essence light balls, and there were faint runes surging inside it, constantly releasing the sword essence aura. Is that the sword principal inheritance? Kong Shibua's eyes trembled slightly, and he could not help but exclaim as he looked at the sword essence light ball. Yes. Nye Tian nodded slightly. He did not expect everything to go so smoothly. He had just entered the sword tomb, and he found a sword principal inheritance. He sensed that this was a wind attribute sword essence inheritance, and it was very suitable for Ren Yihong, who had a dual attribute sword essence of wind and thunder. Chapter 12:26. Nye Tian saw that the other swordsmen had arrived and were all staring at the light ball of sword intent. He could not help but laugh. He looked at Ren Yihong and said, "Your sword intent is of the wind and thunder attribute. If you can absorb this sword art inheritance, your strength will definitely improve." Indeed. Ren Yihong smiled faintly and said, "My sword intent is the wind thunderbolt sword intent. This sword art inheritance is of the wind attribute. If I can integrate it, it will definitely improve my quality." Ren Yihong was of the wind and thunder attribute. When he encountered the sword art inheritance of the wind attribute, the sword intent around him seemed to resonate and he could not help but become restless. "I will block the others for you. Get ready to make a move." Nye Tian smiled faintly and said. At this time, there were not too many swordsmen coming over. It was a good time to make a move. If he waited for more than 100 swordsmen to arrive, Nye Tian might not be able to block all of them by himself. "Thank you, my lord." Ren Yihong nodded slightly. The sword intent that surged around him could no longer be restrained. He took a step forward, and his figure shot into the sky like a ray of light. A pair of wind wings appeared on his back, and his figure was swift to the limit as he flashed towards the ball of sword intent. "Someone is making a move. Stop him." Almost at the same time, the other swordsmen also became crazy. They roared violently and countless figures flew up and actually made a move. A bunch of idiots. Nye Tian looked at these people who were almost crazy and scolded. He signaled Lu Haoyu and the others not to make a move and only to protect the others. The light ball of sword intent was a sword art inheritance of the wind attribute. Only a swordsman with the wind attribute sword intent could perfectly integrate it. There were more than 100 swordsmen present who had the wind attribute sword intent. However, everyone seemed to have gone crazy when they saw the sword art inheritance. Whether it was suitable for them or not, they wanted to fight for it. It really made people speechless. Annihilation Earth Seal, open! Nye Tian quickly formed a seal with his hands, and the ground suddenly shook. Immediately, a huge force lifted it up, and a wall of earth appeared in midair. It was like a small mountain, blocking the path of most of the swordsmen. At the same time, Nye Tian's figure moved, and the reverse serene essence blade appeared in his hand. The long sword swept through the air, and a mighty sword shadow rolled out, sweeping the heavens and earth with the momentum of a raging wave. This brat is a hindrance, let's kill him first. At this moment, a gloomy voice resounded. It was a skinny middle-aged man who stared at Nye Tian with a pair of sinister eyes. His figure shook, and turned into a black ray of light that attacked Nye Tian. Humph! Nye Tianling laughed and said coldly, "You're already more than 300 years old, yet you still come to the sword catacomb to join in the fun. I'll start with you." This man was very old, more than 300 years old. It was very difficult for him to fuse with the sword Dao inheritance at this age. Nye Tian only wanted to stop everyone. He didn't want to kill anyone. However, since the other party wanted to kill him, how could he show mercy? Mad Doomsday, reverse kill. Nye Tian murmured softly. His long sword soared into the air, and his sword intent erupted. The brilliance of the sword was released and bloomed in the void. The mighty sword shadow pressed down like a mountain. Arg! A shrill scream rang out. That skinny middle-aged swordsman did not even have the slightest strength to retaliate and was directly tortured to death by Nye Tian on the spot. The others were taken aback by the scene before their eyes, sucking in a cold breath one after another. Their gazes when looking at Nye Tian carried thick apprehension. That swordsman who was killed had 5th-level Heavenly Emperor strength no matter what. Furthermore, it was even middle-rank sword profound realm. He actually could not even receive one move from Nye Tian. The latter was seriously too terrifying. Nye Tian's brows furrowed and he said coldly, "This sword Dao inheritance is wind attribute. You guys aren't wind attribute swordsmen and are unable to fuse with the inheritance at all. If anyone dares to come over again, this person will be an example." Cold words reverberated in midair, akin to a series of thunderclaps falling down. Everyone subconsciously retreated, not daring to take half a step forward. Amen? But right at this time, Nye Tian suddenly detected a piercingly cold killing intent. He suddenly turned around, and that killing intent actually disappeared, unable to find the source anymore. What terrifying killing intent! Nye Tian's brows furrowed, the shock in his heart considerable. That killing intent earlier, although restrained to the extreme, was still very terrifying, exuding a bone-piercing coldness. The killing intent was clearly directed at Nye Tian, but it disappeared in a flash. Clearly, it was waiting for a suitable opportunity to make a move. Nye Tian's gaze swept across everyone. Holographic divine patterns activated, holographic projections appeared, but he could not find that killing intent anymore. To be able to control killing intent to such an extent, this person must be an assassin, Nye Tian thought to himself. A name appeared in his mind, Azura Sect. Looks like the Azura Sect did not give up but followed all the way over. Nye Tian was in the sword catacomb, separated from Jiuqian Shing, Long Outyen, and the others, so this was the best time to attack him. This person's concealment method was very terrifying. Even Nye Tian's holographic divine patterns could not find him. It was very troublesome. Nye Tian retracted his divine sense slightly, and he became more cautious in his heart. At this time, Ren Yihong had already begun to integrate the inheritance. The others could only watch with blazing faces, but they did not dare to move forward. After a while, the ball of sword intent completely entered Ren Yihong's body, causing his entire aura to become much more domineering. Of course, Nie Tian knew that Renihong had only absorbed the sword inheritance into his body. To completely integrate it, it would still take a very long time. Lord, are you all right? Renihong's figure flashed, and he came to Nie Tian's side. Seeing that the latter's expression was not right, he could not help but ask, I'm fine. Nie Tian smiled faintly, then looked into the distance and said, Let's continue forward. Okay. Renihong nodded heavily. After absorbing the legacy of the Way of the Sword, he could feel how terrifying the power of the legacy was. He even felt a strange power. It was a form of power that he had never seen before, which surprised him. Nie Tian guessed that Renihong was very likely to have absorbed some kind of sword rune power. At this time, Nie Tian and the others were in the center of the sword tomb, but they were not at the center. The sword tomb was wider than he had imagined. As they got closer and closer to the center of the sword tomb, the sword intent in the space became more and more intense. The sword intent in the body of many swordsmen faintly resonated, and the sword intent was constantly released, circulating in the air, abnormally dazzling. The sword tomb was very large. Gradually, the number of people following behind Nie Tian and the others decreased. Most people knew that even if they dared to follow behind Nie Tian and discover the sword inheritance, they would not have a share. It was better to search for it in other places. Nie Tian had been paying attention, secretly paying attention to who was following behind him. Soon, his attention was focused on a man in cyan. This person was hidden in a group of swordsmen, but he obviously had no companions. No one approached him. More importantly, this person had been following Nie Tian, and his aura was restrained to the extreme. Nie Tian used his divine sense to probe, but he could not see the strength of this person. Chapter 12:27. Nie Tian did not bat an eyelid and continued to walk forward. Before figuring out the other party's strength, he would not act rashly. However, he guessed that this person's strength could not be too strong. Otherwise, there was no need to hide his strength. He could just directly kill. This was Tianwang City after all. If the Shura sect sent out peak powerhouses, it would definitely alarm others, and it would not be good. Mister, what is that? Right at this time, Han Ling's voice suddenly sounded, revealing a hint of surprise. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and his attention was immediately attracted by a crimson boulder in front. That boulder had a circumference of 10 meters, crimson like blood, emitting a strange blood-colored light. There was a faint surge of energy within, like a stream of water, unceasingly circling around the boulder, and one could actually see blood-colored ripples spreading out. What stone is this? Pu Fifan was also stunned, and was incomparably delighted. He actually took a step forward, wanting to touch that blood-colored boulder. Watch out! Seeing this scene, Nie Tian cried out in alarm. Han Ling was right beside Pu Fifan, and he immediately reacted, grabbing Pu Fifan. What's wrong? Pu Fifan was badly frightened, his little face as white as paper, and his forehead was full of beads of sweat. This blood boulder is strange. It seems to be the eye of some space-time spirit array. Nie Tian said solemnly, indicating for everyone to retreat. He felt a very strong space-time aura from the blood boulder. He cried out just now because he was worried that this blood boulder would be like the gate of the void, releasing a strong space-time pressure and directly shredding Pu Fifan. Just now, all of Nie Tian's attention was on the person following behind, so he did not pay much attention to the surrounding environment. At this time, he discovered that he actually walked into a spirit array unknowingly. Renihong, pay attention to that green-robed man behind us. There is no aura on his body. Nie Tian transmitted his voice to Renihong, reminding the latter to pay attention. Renihong reacted very quickly, and his expression did not change. He glanced at that person, and his eyes could not help but flicker. That green-robed man actually did not have the slightest essence energy fluctuation, as if he was an ordinary person. This was too strange. One had to know that even peak heavenly emperor powerhouses, wanting to completely conceal the essence energy aura around their bodies, was also extremely difficult to accomplish. This person must have some kind of strange technique to be able to conceal his aura to the extreme. Ren'Yi Hong secretly paid attention to this person. He always remembered that his mission was to protect Nie Tian. After instructing Ren'Yi Hong, Nie Tian spread out his divine sense. The holographic divine patterns were like invisible tentacles, carefully sensing the aura of the surrounding space. On the holographic projection, many runes surged. They were very weak, but they gave off an extremely vast feeling. These runes were originally very powerful, but after hundreds of thousands of years of erosion, they slowly weakened. This is an ancient void spirit array. However, it has existed for too long. Less than 1% of its original power remains, Nie Tian thought to himself. Next, he turned his attention to the blood-red boulder before him. He could sense that the blood-colored boulder in front of him was the eye of the spirit array. Nie Tian controlled the holographic divine runes and carefully sensed the aura within the blood-colored boulder. Slowly, his expression became complicated. Amen. Nie Tian's brows furrowed. He actually sensed another space-time aura on the bloodstone. It seemed like there was a space-time spirit array inside the bloodstone too. Formation within a formation. The next instant, a name surfaced in Nie Tian's mind, and he was incredibly amazed. He had once heard that there were spirit array masters who could set up a spirit array inside a spirit array. Furthermore, the power of a built-in spirit array was even stronger than an external spirit array. Nie Tian sensed that the space-time aura inside the bloodstone seemed to be even stronger than the space-time aura outside. It was very strange. Could it be that this blood-colored boulder is some kind of space-time gate, just like the gate of nothingness, leading to another world? Nie Tian guessed in his heart, his eyes flickering non-stop. Inside the blood-colored boulder was very likely to hide a space-time master. And this boulder withstood the vast majority of the space-time pressure. Hence, even if one approached the boulder, they would not feel too strong space-time pressure either. Nie Tian hesitated, whether or not to enter the blood-colored boulder in front of him and test it out. This move was very dangerous. If the blood-colored boulder released a strong space-time pressure, it would be too late for Nie Tian to retreat even if he wanted to. Master! At this moment, Corpse Demon Lord's voice was heard, with a hint of excitement. Corpse Demon Lord, did you find anything? Nie Tian exclaimed in surprise and asked. Master, don't you feel that the aura of this bloodstone is a little special? It's like déjà vu, Corpse Demon Lord chuckled and said. Déjà vu? Nie Tian was slightly stunned. Using his divine sense, his eyes trembled as he immediately thought of something. He exclaimed in his heart, the Elixir Refiner Guild's Dan Xian Soul Stone. After Corpse Demon Lord's reminder, Nie Tian immediately recalled that there was an aura in the bloodstone in front of him. It was similar to the aura of the Dan Xian Soul Stone that he had encountered in the 3,000 Lesser Worlds. Nie Tian had once used the Dan Xian Soul Stone to enhance his mental strength, but he never had the chance to understand the Dan Xian Soul Stone again. He still remembered that there were many strange runes on the Dan Xian Soul Stone. Now that he thought about it, they were some kind of divine rune. The aura of the blood-colored boulder and the Dan Xian Soul Stone were similar. The two stones should be made of the same material, just that there were different divine runes carved on them. Master, other than the aura of the Dan Xian Soul Stone, this bloodstone seems to have another kind of aura. Corpse Demon Lord chuckled and said, There's another kind of aura? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. When he sensed the blood-colored boulder again, his expression gradually became extremely strange. It seems to be. Nie Tian's voice was slightly trembling. He couldn't believe the aura that he felt, and his expression was a little stiff. Yes, Corpse Demon Lord knew what Nie Tian felt. He chuckled and said, It's the aura of the 3 lives grass. 3 lives grass. Nye Tian felt the aura of the 3 lives grass on the blood-colored boulder. This was too strange. It was clearly a boulder. How could it have the aura of the 3 lives grass? Just now, Nye Tian's attention was all focused on the blood-colored runes on the boulder. He didn't pay attention to the aura of the boulder itself. After Corpse Demon Lord's reminder, he then noticed the strangeness of the boulder. The next moment, Nye Tian suddenly thought of something. His expression was dazed, and he completely froze. When the others saw the change in Nye Tian's expression, they were all astonished, but they didn't dare to disturb Nye Tian. After a full 10 seconds, Nye Tian finally reacted. Looking at the blood-colored boulder in front of him, his eyes shone with an extremely scorching light, like a hungry man seeing a delicacy. Corpse Demon Lord, you mean, this bloodstone is? Nye Tian calmed down a little. His forehead was full of sweat, and his voice was uncontrollably trembling. Yes. Corpse Demon Lord nodded heavily. His small body was almost dancing excitedly. He said, if I guessed correctly, this bloodstone is the 3 live stone that old sword mentioned. Chapter 12:28. After a long time, Nye Tian finally reacted and shouted excitedly in his heart, 3 life stone, this is actually the 3 life stone. He never thought that he would actually encounter the 3 life stone here. Sword Elder once said that in order to create a yuan vein for share, 2 things were needed, 3 life grass and 3 life stone. The 3 life grass was used to replace the yuan vein, while the 3 life stone was used to fuse the 3 life grass and share's body together. Nye Tian already had the 3 life grass essence, so now he only lacked the 3 life stone. Sword Elder once said that it was impossible for the 3 life stone to exist in the God realm, but this was the ancient sword tomb. An ancient swordsman should have obtained the 3 life stone from somewhere else and brought it here. I have both the 3 lives grass and 3 lives stone. Doesn't this mean that I can create a yuan meridian for Shui-er? Nye Tian's heart was filled with excitement as he stared at the blood-colored rock in front of him. But in the next moment, his eyes narrowed and his expression became somewhat solemn. Although he had obtained the 3 life grass and 3 life stone, Sword Elder had left, so he had no idea how to create a yuan vein. At this time, Nye Tian suddenly thought of something and asked, Corpse Demon, I didn't notice the aura of the 3 life grass on the bloodstone, how did you notice it? Just now, Nye Tian's attention was not on the bloodstone itself, but with his perception, he should have been able to directly perceive the aura of the 3 life grass. It was very strange that Corpse Demon Monarch was able to detect the aura of the 3 life grass before him. Master. Corpse Demon Monarch laughed and said, Sword Elder and I usually chat a lot. He told me a lot of things, including the aura of the 3 life grass in the 3 life stone. Moreover, he also told me some of the characteristics of the 3 life stone, so I immediately suspected that it might be the 3 life stone. Nye Tian was stunned. He actually didn't know these things. In fact, it was not strange when he thought about it. Sword Elder and Corpse Demon Monarch were both old monsters. They usually had nothing to do, so if they didn't chat, their lives would be too boring. Thinking of this, Nye Tian's eyes trembled slightly as he said, Sure Luo, did Sword Elder tell you how to create yuan meridians? Master. The Cadaver Demon Monarch smiled again and said, Old man Jian was afraid that he wouldn't be able to hold on one day, so he told me many things. How to create yuan meridians was just one of them. As for the other matters, he said that he could only wait for the right time to tell Master. Gulp. Nye Tian's expression stiffened. His throat rolled and his mouth suddenly felt dry. He never thought that there would be such a secret between the Sword Elder and the Corpse Demon Monarch. Since the Corpse Demon Monarch knew how to create origin veins, that was great. In the next moment, Nye Tian became cold descended. Looking at the blood-colored boulder in front of him, he swore in his heart, I must obtain the 3 live stone. The 3 live stone was too important to him. He had to get it. "Mister, is there anything strange about this stone?" Han Ling saw Nie Tian's expression change again and finally couldn't help but ask curiously. "It is indeed strange." Nie Tian smiled faintly, but didn't explain too much. Then, Nie Tian probed the 3 lives stone with his divine sense, thinking about how to take it away. The 3 lives stone had a radius of 10 meters, and its material was very special. Nie Tian estimated that its weight was at least 10 million kilograms. No interspatial ring could withstand such a heavy object. If the 3 lives stone was placed in an interspatial ring, it would probably shatter. With Nie Tian's current strength, he could definitely lift the 3 lives stone, but this method was too flashy. It was not feasible. "Master, the 3 lives stone is a living thing. You can put it in the Chaos Source coffin," the cadaver demon Monarch reminded at this time. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect the 3 lives stone to be a living thing. This way, things would be much simpler. Any object that wanted to enter a martial artist's spiritual space must have the martial artist's spiritual imprint. The spiritual imprint could only be carved on living things, like the Star Soul tablet. Thinking of this, Nie Tian no longer hesitated. A strand of divine sense entered the 3 lives stone, and the spiritual imprint turned into a golden light that entered the 3 lives stone. Boom! However, in the next moment, a powerful force rebounded, and actually shook Nie Tian's entire body. He staggered back a few steps, almost unable to stand. What a terrifying restrictive power! Nie Tian was shocked. His eyes trembled, and he only reacted after a long time. There was a powerful restrictive power hidden in the 3 lives stone, and it actually rebounded his spiritual imprint directly. If the spiritual imprint couldn't be carved, the 3 lives stone couldn't enter Nie Tian's spiritual space. Nie Tian currently had level 95 spiritual power, and with the existence of the holographic divine pattern, his divine sense was already very strong. His spiritual imprint was even more terrifying than a peak heavenly emperor, but he didn't expect that he couldn't break through the restrictive power of the 3 lives stone. This is a spiritual restriction to prevent others from taking away the 3 lives stone. Nie Tian became cold and muttered in his heart. It seemed that the person who placed the 3 lives stone here had already anticipated this and made preparations in advance. This is troublesome. The cadaver corpse demon Monarch also felt the existence of the spiritual restriction, but he couldn't break it at all. If not for Nie Tian's divine sense being strong enough, the rebound just now would have caused his divine sense to collapse. "I don't care, I must obtain the 3 lives stone, no matter the cost." Nie Tian frowned and his heart hardened. "I want to enter the 3 lives stone and see what's inside." Thinking of this, Nie Tian's gaze swept over the others, and then he noticed the green-robed man. The latter stood there like a block of wood, looking harmless. Nie Tian knew that the more this kind of person was, the more dangerous they were. Once his aura erupted, it would be the most fatal killing weapon. However, Nie Tian didn't care too much now. To him, obtaining the 3 lives stone was the most important thing. "Everyone, this blood-colored boulder has a space-time spirit array. It should be the entrance to another world. Let's enter." Nie Tian transmitted to the others, reminding them to prepare to enter. The 3 lives stone in the sword catacomb contained a space-time spirit array. Nie Tian was very curious about what kind of world such a space-time gate would lead to. Han Ling and the others were stunned for a moment, but Nie Tian had already walked toward the 3 lives stone. Nie Tian's body moved slightly, and a surge of Yuan Qi entered the 3 lives stone. Immediately, a blood-colored light shot out, forming a blood-colored tunnel in front of him. "Let's go in." Nie Tian didn't hesitate and directly stepped in. Han Ling and the others immediately reacted and moved their bodies, following him in. The other onlooking swordsmen were dumbfounded at the scene before them. Then, their eyes lit up and they actually followed in. Chapter 12:29. The blood-colored passageway did not stay open for long. It was only for a short moment, and the glaring blood-colored light made it hard for people to open their eyes. Nye Tian felt that the surrounding space and time environment had changed instantly. When he opened his eyes again, he was already in another world. What is this place? Everyone looked at the completely unfamiliar world in front of them, stunned and speechless. This was an extremely mysterious world. Giant swords were suspended high in the sky, like giant pillars, floating in the sky, giving the world a sense of majesty and vastness. The surrounding space was filled with a strong aura of sword will, surging to the extreme, even rushing into the pores of the warriors and directly into their bodies. Everyone felt the aura of sword will around them, and their eyes flashed with uncontrollable excitement. They seemed to have come to a very mysterious world of sword will. The surging sword will around them stimulated the sword heart of the swordsman, making them feel like their blood was boiling. Many people greedily absorbed the sword will, feeling that the momentum of their body was soaring wildly, and they actually had a feeling that they could break through at any time. Nye Tian looked at everything in front of him, but on the holographic projection, there was a different sword will aura surging, like a group of black vortexes surging, trying to penetrate into the bodies of the warriors. In an instant, Nye Tian immediately understood and shouted to remind everyone, "Don't absorb these sword wills." Han Ling and the others were stunned, not knowing what Nye Tian had discovered, but they still listened to him and stopped absorbing the surrounding sword will. But the others did not listen at all, and instead absorbed the sword will even more crazily. "I broke through. Ha!" The next moment an ecstatic voice sounded, extremely excited. "Ha ha, I also broke through." Then another voice sounded, also unusually excited. Seeing that these two people had really broken through, the eyes of the others flashed, and their eyes became greedy. Many people actually sat cross-legged, ready to absorb the sword will and break through. "Oh no!" Nye Tian looked at the two people who had broken through, but his eyes trembled, and he could not help but scream. Boom! Boom! Before his voice fell, suddenly two explosions sounded, and the two people who had broken through directly exploded, blood splashing everywhere, and it was extremely tragic. The bloody scene shocked everyone. Everyone quickly stood up and looked at the bloody light in the sky in shock, not knowing what had happened. "Sir, what's going on?" Rennie Hong was relatively calm. He walked to Nye Tian's side and asked in a trembling voice. "We've entered an illusion," Nye Tian said in a deep voice. His sharp eyes stared at the surging sword intent around him and said, "These sword intents are very strange. There is a very violent power within them. After the swordsman absorbs it, he will not be able to withstand this power. The final result is that his martial body will explode and he will die." This. When the others heard Nye Tian's words, they were all dazed for a moment. Then, their gazes turned to fear, and they hurriedly operated their yuan meridians, trying to force out the sword intent that they had absorbed. "Don't move!" Nye Tian immediately exclaimed, "Don't circulate your yuan meridians. That will only make the sword intent you absorb even more violent." But it was already a step too late. There were still people who directly circulated their yuan meridians. Instantly, the violent power teased within their bodies. Numerous tyrannical sword intents burst out of their bodies, and those people directly exploded and died. There were more than 20 swordsmen who had entered with Nye Tian. In the blink of an eye, 7 or 8 of them had died. They had all died in an inexplicable manner. The others didn't dare to move at all. They stood where they were and even stopped breathing. They didn't dare to make any movements, afraid that they would trigger the violent power within their bodies and explode. Nye Tian gestured to Rennie Hong and the others not to move recklessly, while he forcibly circulated the 9 dragon veins in his body. Immediately, he felt waves of violent sword intent surge out, as if a wild beast was attacking his body. This power was extremely terrifying. Sweat the size of beans appeared on Nye Tian's forehead, and his face was twisted. It was obvious that he was in extreme pain. Everyone stared at Nye Tian in shock, knowing that he was forcing out the sword intent. Boom! Finally, Nye Tian's body trembled as a violent sword intent gushed out of his body. His countenance gradually returned to normal. What a terrifying sword intent! I only absorbed a little bit of it, and it took me so much effort to force it out. Nye Tian was shocked in his heart. He didn't purposely absorb the sword intent, but absorbed it automatically. In addition to the fact that he had a supreme dragon meridian body, he also had the support of billions of astral energy in his body. If not, even if he forced the sword intent out, he would still be injured. This sword intent was too strange. Nye Tian had never seen such a violent and sharp sword intent before. Everyone, don't move. Nye Tian spoke indifferently. After that, he walked to Ren Yihang's side and channeled astral energy into him, slowly helping him to force the violent sword intent out of his body. Luckily, the sword intent could accept external energy and wouldn't be triggered. Also, the astral energy could suppress all other types of energy, allowing Nye Tian to help Ren Yihang force out the sword intent. Next, Nye Tian helped Han Ling and the others force the sword intent out of their bodies. The other swordsmen stared at Nye Tian, obviously hoping that he would help them. Nye Tian pondered for a moment, but in the end, he still helped the others force out the sword intent. The environment here was very strange. He might need these people's help to break the illusion later. Coincidentally, Chen Tianla of the Chen family's sword union, who Nye Tian was concerned about, was also here. Thank you, Lord. Chen Tianla bowed to Nye Tian in gratitude when he felt the violent sword intent in his body disappear. Although he didn't know Nye Tian's identity, he saw Ren Yihang, Lu Haoyu, and the others treating Nye Tian with respect, so he addressed him respectfully as Nye Tian. Finally, Nye Tian walked to the green-robed man's side. The latter was the Shura's Gate assassin. You're here to kill me, aren't you? Nye Tian asked in a low voice as he stared at the green-robed man. Yes. The green-robed man hesitated for a moment, then nodded without denying it. He was obviously very surprised. He hid his aura very well, so how did Nye Tian discover it? How did you find out? The green-robed man's eyes flickered and he couldn't help asking. Very simple, because you hid it too well. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, How can a person without the slightest trace of spiritual energy be an ordinary person? Only an assassin can hide his aura so well. The green-robed man frowned. He didn't expect that hiding his aura so well was also a flaw. Ren Yihang and the others were stunned. They didn't expect this green-robed man to be an assassin. You want to kill me? The green-robed man asked indifferently. There wasn't the slightest hint of fear in his eyes. Instead, he was extremely calm. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as if he sensed something. He said indifferently, I think I know who you are. You're Bailey Fengchen's disciple. Chapter 12:30. Bailey Fengchen. When the others heard this name, they were stunned as well, staring at the green-robed man in shock. No one expected this person to be Bailey Fengchen's disciple. The Illusion Emperor Bailey Fengchen was one of the 9 emperors of the Heaven World, the strongest illusionist in the Heaven World, a rank 7 illusionist. This was Nye Tian's memory of Bailey Fengchen from his previous life. He wondered if Bailey Fengchen's illusions had improved after 100 years. Bailey Fengchen was ranked 2nd among the 9 emperors, and only the Snow Emperor could suppress him. It was rumored that if Bailey Fengchen's mastery of illusions could reach rank 8, even the Snow Empress of the 9 emperors might not be his match. Nye Tian had met Bailey Fengchen several times in his previous life. In his memory, Bailey Fengchen was an amiable old man, with the demeanor of an elder. Just now, he suddenly felt an illusion aura from the green-robed man, and he reacted immediately. The reason why Nye Tian could not sense the green-robed man's strength was because he had set up an illusion array around him. It really is an illusion array. Almost at the same time, the corpse demon lord's voice rang out. He did not notice the illusion array around the green-robed man, and only now did he realize it. The corpse demon lord was a rank 6 illusionist, and to be able to hide from his illusion array, the person had to be at least rank 6, or even rank 7. Therefore, the green-robed man in front of him was at least a rank 6 illusionist, and there was a possibility that he was a rank 7 illusionist. Nie Tian guessed that the green-robed man was a rank 6 illusionist, and his illusions might be stronger than the corpse demon lord's. For someone to have such illusions, the first person that came to Nie Tian's mind was Bailey Fengchen. When he said that the green-robed man was Bailey Fengchen's disciple, it was just a casual remark. However, the green-robed man's reaction proved that he was right. Nie Tian's gaze turned complicated. The green-robed man was an assassin, and at the same time, Bailey Fengchen's disciple. Could it be that Bailey Fengchen is related to the Shura's Gate? A guess appeared in Nie Tian's mind, and it sent chills down his spine. If the green-robed man was an Azura's Gate assassin, then Bailey Fengchen was most likely the Azura's Gate sovereign. One of the 9 emperors was actually the Azura's Gate sovereign. This joke was too big. My name is Zhuo Qianchen. I have indeed been ordered to kill you, but what I have done has nothing to do with my master. Don't make wild guesses. The green-robed man could tell what Nie Tian was thinking. His eyes trembled and he said without hesitation, Nie Tian's gaze froze. He stared straight at Zhuo Qianchen. The latter's gaze was very calm, and he did not avoid it at all. Zhuo Qianchen didn't lie, Nie Tian concluded and let out a long sigh of relief. If someone like Bailey Fengchen became the Azura sect sovereign, then the heavenly world would be too disappointing. Nie Tian still remembered that Long Outian was able to survive because of Bailey Fengchen's request. Otherwise, Luo Chunhun would never have allowed Long Outian to live. So, you're not from the Azura's Gate? Nie Tian became cold, asking in an indifferent tone. I'm not. Zhuo Qianchen replied indifferently. Since you're not from the Azura's Gate, why are you here to kill me? Nie Tian laughed, but his face darkened. Do you know who I am? I don't. Zhuo Qianchen said calmly. I only know that as long as I kill you, I can get what I want. A playful smile appeared on Nie Tian's face. He immediately understood that Zhuo Qianchen made a deal with someone. As long as he killed Nie Tian, he would get something very important to him. I want to know, who are you making a deal with? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, asking in a heavy tone. This is my business, it has nothing to do with you. Zhuo Qianchen said in an indifferent tone. You want to kill me, yet you're saying this has nothing to do with me? Nie Tian sneered, but a cold light flickered in his eyes. Don't think that just because you're Bailey Fengchen's disciple, I won't dare to kill you. Nie Tian noticed that a small amount of violent sword intent seeped into Zhuo Qianchen's body. Most likely, when the latter first entered, he didn't notice that this was an illusion. Zhuo Qianchen was indeed a genius. Not only was he an illusionist, but he was also a swordsman. Both illusionists and swordsmen were rare characters, especially the former. There were only a handful of people who could have both identities at the same time, and Zhuo Qianchen might be the only one. At least, among all the people that Nie Tian had met, there was no one who was both a swordsman and an illusionist. Perhaps this was the reason why someone asked Zhuo Qianchen to kill him. Zhuo Qianchen didn't seem to be lying. He didn't know Nie Tian's identity at all, so it was very likely that he was being used. Zhuo Qianchen was in a very bad situation. The violent sword intent in his body was getting stronger and stronger, and he couldn't force it out by himself, so he had to ask Nie Tian for help. However, he didn't panic and he remained calm. I bet that you won't kill me. If you kill me, you will also die in this illusion, Zhuo Qianchen said in a deep voice. At the same time, a layer of colorful light flashed around him, and his appearance changed. From a middle-aged man, he turned into a handsome young man in his 20s. It turned out that not only did Zhuo Qianchen hide his strength, but he also faked his appearance. Nie Tian was slightly stunned. The young man in front of him was really handsome, similar to Duanmu. They both had a face that women like. The others were also stunned, and they were very surprised. Nie Tian twitched the corner of his mouth, thought for a moment, and said, "How about we make a deal? I won't kill you, and I will help you force out the sword intent in your body, and you will break the illusion in front of you. What do you think?" He didn't accept Zhuo Qianchen's threat, but he didn't plan to kill him at all. The illusion in front of him was indeed tricky. If he couldn't break it, the violent sword intent would continue to seep into his body, and then everyone would be in danger. However, to break the illusion, Nie Tian didn't necessarily need Zhuo Qianchen's help. The Corpse Demon King could do it as well. He just needed to give Zhuo Qianchen a way out, so that he could break the illusion, and it would save him a lot of trouble. "All right." The corner of Zhuo Qianchen's lips curled up and he said, "I promise I won't kill you here. But once we leave this place, I will kill you all the same." "Sure." Nie Tian laughed and said, "I'm also curious to see how formidable Bailey Fengchen's disciple is." Then, Nie Tian didn't hesitate anymore. He stepped forward and helped Zhuo Qianchen force out the sword intent. At this time, Zhuo Qianchen no longer concealed his strength. The illusionary realm around him was removed. 5th level Heavenly Emperor's strength. Initial rank Sword Profound Realm. Nie Tian immediately sensed Zhuo Qianchen's strength, and his gaze could not help quivering. This guy was only in his 20s, and his sword Dao strength was actually so formidable. It seemed like even Ren Yihong was somewhat inferior. The most terrifying thing was that this person was even an illusionist whose rank was not weak. Truly too terrifying. "It's up to you now." Nie Tian was surprised in his heart, but he was very calm on the surface. He smiled faintly, waiting for Zhuo Qianchen to make a move. The others' eyes also flickered, all wanting to see how the Illusion Emperor's disciple broke the illusion array. Chapter 12:31. As Zhuo Qianchen unleashed his sword intent, a 7-colored sword radiance permeated the space, like ripples on the surface of water, surging in all directions. The 7-colored sword radiance surged in the space like a rainbow, dazzling and dazzling. At the same time, it released a very sharp aura, the sharpness of the sword. What a terrifying person! Everyone looked at the 7-colored sword radiance in the sky and shuddered. This was the first time they had seen an illusionist in action. The scene was so beautiful that they could not bear to look at it directly. To be able to merge illusion and sword intent so perfectly, Zhuo Qianchen is indeed a genius. Nie Tian could feel that the sword intent whirlpool in the space was gradually fading, and everything around him gradually became clear. Zhuo Qianchen was indeed a genius. To be able to master sword intent and illusion at the same time, and to be able to merge the two forces perfectly, it was truly terrifying. This kid is indeed Bailey Fengchen's disciple. His mastery of illusion is actually comparable to mine. Corpse Demon Lord could not help but say when he felt the aura of illusion in the space. His eyes flickered and he felt extremely guilty. How could Nie Tian not hear that Corpse Demon Lord's evaluation was somewhat exaggerated? From his observation, Zhuo Qianchen's mastery of illusion was above Corpse Demon Lord's, and he was also a genius in Sword Dao, which was very rare. Corpse Demon Lord and Bailey Fengchen were of the same generation, and he was actually much older than the latter. To have him admit that his mastery of illusion was not as good as Zhuo Qianchen, of course, he would not accept it. A moment later, Zhuo Qianchen's forehead was covered in sweat. It was obvious that he had consumed a large amount of sword intent and yuanli. This ancient illusion array was, of course, not easy to break. Even if it had been eroded by time for hundreds of thousands of years, it was still very difficult to break. Good lad, he is really going to break the illusion array. At this moment, Corpse Demon Lord seemed to have noticed something. His eyes trembled violently, and there was a burning passion in them. Bang! In the next moment, a huge explosion rang out, resounding through the void. It was as if some sort of barrier had collapsed. Boom! Then, a billowing wave spread in all directions. Then, the violent sword intent in the space disappeared, and the world became much clearer, as if it was the dawn of the night. Everyone sensed that the surrounding sword will had disappeared, and they immediately felt refreshed. The pressure that had been suppressing their hearts had dissipated. Finally, Zhuqianshan's body trembled slightly, and he could not help but take a few steps back. Breaking through the illusionary realm had consumed a large amount of his essence force. At this moment, his face was pale and he was extremely weak. Zhuqianshan let out a long breath and swallowed a few spiritual pills. His complexion looked better, but he raised his head to look at Nie Tian, as if he was worried that Nie Tian would go back on his word and attack him. Zhuqianshan smiled faintly. He had never thought of killing Zhuqianshan, and there was no way he would take advantage of Zhuqianshan. After the illusion array was broken, Nie Tian raised the corner of his mouth and looked up into the sky. The hundreds of meters-long swords were still there, and he could clearly see that there was a light ball of sword intent floating above each of the swords. The light ball of sword intent kept spinning, releasing dazzling sword light, and the sword light shot thousands of meters away. Such a strong sword intent! Everyone saw the light ball of sword intent above their heads, and they were all stunned. The sword intent in the sky was too strong, like a waterfall, pouring down from the sky, and it made people feel like they were wrapped by the sword intent. This was not an illusion, but a real sword intent. These are all. Nie Tian felt the sword intent in the sky, and his voice began to tremble. Sword Dao Inheritance. Corpse Demon King excitedly said the next 4 words. The sword intent in the light ball of sword intent in the sky was much stronger than the sword art inheritance that Ren Yihong had integrated. Without a doubt, these sword intent light balls were all sword art inheritances. Oh my God! The others reacted and immediately exclaimed. There were at least tens of thousands of giant swords floating in the sky, and there was a light ball of sword intent on each of the giant swords. Didn't this mean that there were tens of thousands of sword art inheritances here? Oh my God, am I dreaming? Slap. Someone thought he was dreaming and slapped, but it landed on another person's face. It hurts. It hurts a lot. Seems like I'm not dreaming. Not only was the person who was slapped not angry, but he looked at the person who slapped him gratefully, and smiled foolishly. This was too shocking. To find tens of thousands of sword art inheritances at once, it was unimaginably terrifying. There were so many sword art inheritances, and the aura of each inheritance was extremely strong, very scary. It was hard to imagine what kind of wealth this was. Nie Tian was also taken aback. Such a shocking discovery shocked him to the core and rendered him speechless for a long time. Boom! At this moment there was a sudden explosion in the sky, and the space shook violently, as if it was being torn by a huge force. In the next moment it could no longer bear it, and a huge crack appeared. Boom! Then, in the space crack, a huge sword shadow appeared, and swooped down from the sky, like a ferocious ancient giant beast. Its power was so strong that it shook the heaven and earth. Master, be careful! Almost at the same time, Corpse Luo Demon King screamed. Because of panic, it was unusually ear-piercing. Nie Tian reacted extremely quickly, and a meteor intent appeared behind him. With a flap of his wings, his figure quickly retreated tens of thousands of meters away. At the same time, another figure also flew up, but at a much slower speed. Boom! 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 In the next instant, Pan Rant's sword image in the sky split into 9. Like giant pillars, they pierced deep into the ground and surrounded everyone. Boom! The sword intent contained in the 9 sword shadows was suddenly released. Waves of powerful and direct sword intent burst out and quickly condensed together, forming a huge sword net that enveloped everyone. Fortunately, Nie Tion's reaction was fast enough, and he was also fast enough to escape from the sword net. The other person who reacted at the same time as Nie Tion was Zhuo Qianchen, but unfortunately, his speed was not fast enough, and he was still covered by the sword net. What a strong sword formation aura! Nie Tion's figure froze in the sky, looking at the sword net formation, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. He had not expected this to be a sword formation. Moreover, the power of the formation was extremely strong. Even though he was outside the formation, he could still feel an extremely vast aura surging towards him. Even his dragon's vein was being suppressed by this aura. What the hell is this? Everyone was trapped by the sword formation, and someone screamed, as if he wanted to attack, but found that the yuan meridians in his body were tightly suppressed, and he couldn't release any yuan force. Ren'Yi Hong and the others were also stunned. This sword formation was very terrifying, and it could actually completely suppress a martial artist's yuan meridians, so martial artists couldn't use yuan force. In a situation where there was no yuan force to support, even sword intent couldn't exert too much power, and it was impossible to break this sword formation.